Pier 1. I'm located here at the Pier 1 port offices in San Francisco, and our meeting will include participants who are here in the room and those who are participating online. And I want to thank the port for hosting the meeting here tonight. Our first order of business is to call the roll, and board members, can you please unmute yourselves to respond and then mute yourselves again after responding? Staff Ashley, can you call the roll?
Yeah. Chair McCann.
Present.
Vice Chair Strang.
Present.
Board Member Battaglio.
Present.
Board Member Fonseca Flores.
Present.
Board Member Hall and Pellegrini will be here shortly.
Thank you, Ashley. Dan Hodap with the Port of San Francisco. I see all 5 of our committee members are here, so we'll consider that a full roll. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dan, and thank you, Ashley. We have a quorum present, so we're duly constituted to conduct business. I want to share some instructions to begin with on how we can best participate in this meeting so that it runs as smoothly as possible. For everyone online and in the meeting room, please make sure that you have your microphones or phones muted to avoid background noise. For board members, if you have a webcam, please make sure that it's on so that everybody can see you. And for members of the public, if you'd like to speak during a public comment period that is part of an agenda item, you will need to do so in one of 3 ways. First, if you are here with us in person, we will ask you to form a line near the podium if you wish to make a public comment. Speaker cards are available at the door, and you will be asked to come up to the podium one at a time and to state your name and affiliation prior to providing your comments during the meeting. After all individuals who are present make their comments, we shall call on those participants who are attending remotely to participate in the meeting. The second way, if you're attending on the Zoom platform, please raise your virtual hand in Zoom. If you are new to Zoom and you joined our meeting using the Zoom application, click the hand at the bottom of your screen. The hand should turn blue when it's raised. Finally, if you're joining our meeting via phone, you must press *9 on your keypad to raise or lower your hand to make a comment, and *6 to mute or unmute your phone. We will call on individuals who have raised their hands in the order that they are raised. After you are called on, you will be unmuted so that you can share your comments. Please state your name and affiliation at the beginning of your remarks. Remember, you have a limit of 3 minutes to speak on an item, and we will tell you when you have 1 minute remaining. Please keep your comments respectful and focused. We are here to listen to everyone who wishes to address us, but everyone has the responsibility to act in a civil manner. We will not tolerate hate speech, threats made directly or indirectly, and/or abusive language. We will mute anyone who fails to follow these guidelines or who exceeds the established time limits without permission. For public comments, if you are attending online, please note that we will only hear your voices. Your video will not be enabled. If you are attending the meeting on the Zoom platform, we recommend using the gallery view option in view settings in order to see all the panelists. Audio for in-person panelists is recorded through the room's audio system and is not synced to the individual panelists' videos. If you would like to add your contact information to the interested parties list to be notified of future meetings concerning these projects, please call or email our board secretary, Ashley Tomalin, and her contact information is on the screen in front of us and can also be found on the BCDC's website. And finally, every now and again, you will hear me refer to the meeting host, who is Yuri tonight. Our BCDC staff are acting here as hosts for the meeting behind the scenes to ensure that technology moves the meeting forward smoothly and consistently. Please be patient with us if it's needed. And now the board secretary will provide a staff update. Dan, to you, sorry, to Dan.
Welcome, BCDC Design Review Board members and Port of San Francisco Waterfront Design Advisory Committee members. Do I go to Marcia's?
Yes.
First item on the agenda is a remembrance of our past Waterfront Design Advisory Committee member, Marcia Madom. Marcia was an incredible person and wonderful to have on the committee. She held valuable insight into how architecture interacts with people in the public realm, and she was a master communicator. When it was Marcia's turn to speak, here the room would go silent. People waited and listened to her every word. She possessed extensive knowledge of architecture, historic rehabilitation, and urban design, She could explain complex issues in a manner that everyone understood. And she left all agreeing that with her guidance, the project would be better. And she did so in a very humble manner. She was gracious to all, never providing a reason to be criticized. So much of what she did was to humanize architecture and public space. In conversation, you could tell she appreciated diverse viewpoints, which was evident in how she spoke and treated others. Marcia, I and the board thank you for making the waterfront a more attractive, more efficient, and overall better place. And we shall miss you. Bill Leddy, Marcia's husband, is here. Just want to acknowledge him. Thank him for coming and for all he has done for the board and done with Marcia. Appreciate that we condole you for your loss. This is a time if other board or committee members want to mention Marcia or say anything, I welcome that as well. And it's, I think, the others in the room appreciate Marcia's contribution throughout of what she did. And she served on the committee from 2005 until 2022. Right, so a very long run on. She'll miss that. Thank you very much. Move on to the next item here.
Yes.
It's your staff report in your items.
Okay. The first item we have is for minutes of the April 10th, 2023 Waterfront Design Advisory Committee, and which were distributed to the committee members. Are there any changes, alterations, suggestions for those minutes? If not, they stand as drafted. We also circulated operating procedures for the Waterfront Design Advisory Committee, and we will be choosing a chair of the committee, but we're not going to do it this evening. Are there any, do any of the committee members have comments on the operating procedures for that committee? And those are amendable at any time, so we'll stand with those as drafted at this point in time.
Okay, thank you, Dan. And on behalf of the BCDC Design Review Board, Bill, I just want to add our condolences to you. As Dan mentioned, the longevity of Marcia's association with the waterfront has left a visible legacy for everyone. So we're very grateful to her work over many years. Okay, so we'll move to the approval of the draft summary for January 8th, 2024 meeting. We were furnished with those, the draft summary. That was the meeting that we reviewed DePave Park and 1301 Shoreway Life Development. Any corrections or comments from anyone?
Yeah, I have some corrections and I'm going to send them by email because they're a little long-winded, but I'll just go over it very quickly so everybody knows the basic content. So I'll read what was described to me and then what it should be corrected to. It is refreshing to see a softening approach as opposed to developing undesirable areas. It would probably be clearer to say it is encouraging to see an example of managed retreat that creates newly accessible outdoor space as opposed to using engineering solutions to hold back the advance of the ocean. Then next is there's beauty to a landscape being legible, non-didactic learning. At Marina Green, you can see a lot of rubble and there's not a need for overwhelming signage. It's about self-discovery. Possibly better, there is value to learning through self-discovery and minimizing the use of signage. For example, at the Marina Green at low tide, one can notice on one's own the classical stone building parts were used for riprap at the water's edge after the earthquake of 1906. And finally, observe that allowing dogs does seem like a cross mission to the intention of the park. Change to allowing dogs seems contrary to the intention for the park, which is to establish a natural ecology. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we'll take those on board when we approve the notes. I also have two minor ones, page 8. point 4 in the top section. It was a comment I made, third line down, just change the word instill to create. Create regulations to address potential conflict. And then the final sentence, like that the design is assisting in the park's objectives, we could just strike that. I don't think that's necessary. Okay, any other changes? Okay, so I think 4 of us were at that meeting. Let me just double check. You weren't, no. You weren't. So Gary, it's you and me. Would you like to move to approve?
I will
the
make a
minutes?
motion to approve the minutes.
And I will
Would you like to
second it. Yes. All those in favour?
Aye.
Me, yes. Okay, thank you. And look, thank you to staff for preparing these, and particularly for DePave Park, because that was a single review and it's been passed on, and it's a very large project. So I'm grateful that you have recorded detailed notes of that to guide staff as the project moves forward. Right, we will move to the next item on the agenda, which is the staff update. Ashley, I'll hand it back to you for that.
I'd like to acknowledge that Board Member Hall has arrived and she is now in meeting. I'm going to try to keep this brief tonight. Form 700 is the time of the year when I must remind the board to complete their online Form 700 filing for Statement of Economic Interests. You should have received an email with instructions on how to file electronically. Please check your junk mail filter if you have not seen the email. I can also forward you the email. The filing is due Tuesday, April 2nd. We will not be having a DRB meeting in April. And that concludes my staff update.
Okay, thank you. We'll move to the next item, which is public comments for items which are not on tonight's agenda. If there's anyone who wants to speak to items like that. And we'll start with those members of the public who are in our headquarters building here today. If anyone would like to speak to an item that's not on the agenda, form a line near the podium to make a public comment. Seeing none, we'll move to online. Is there anyone online who would like to make a public comment for items that are not on tonight's agenda?
We have no one online.
Okay, I will not read the detailed instructions. Okay, thank you. So we'll move now to the second review of proposed alterations at the Ferry Building and Ferry Plaza in San Francisco. And this is item 6. It's a second review, and I will just remind you, everyone, of the order for this. So we will start with BCDC and Port staff introductions to the project. Then we will have the project proponent presentation. We'll have board and committee clarifying questions. We'll have public comment, then followed by board and committee discussion and summary. And then we'll conclude with a project proponent response, a brief response to what's been heard in the discussion and summary. So with that, I'll hand to BCDC permit analyst, Catherine Pan, who's going to introduce the project.
We have somebody raising our hand, an online participant raising their hand.
Oh.
Are you speaking or public comment for an item that's not on tonight's agenda? Yeah.
No, this
Robert?
is for items linked to Ferry Building enhancement project.
Okay, there will be an opportunity to comment after the staff intros.
Okay, thanks, Catherine.
All right. Thank you, Chair McCann, and good evening, board members and committee members. I'm Catherine Pan, BCDC's Shoreline Development Program Manager, and I'll be introducing tonight's project in terms of our regulatory context. Before I do, I'd like to remind the project team and staff to please turn on your video when you're speaking or answering questions. When you're not actively engaged with the board, please turn off your video and mute your microphone so that we may minimize distractions on screen. And this is the second review of the Ferry Building and Ferry Plaza alterations project in the city and county of San Francisco. The previous review was April 10th, 2023. So the proposed project is located at the Ferry Building, a landmark on the San Francisco waterfront where Market Street meets the Embarcadero, just south of Pier 1. The Ferry Building is an active ferry terminal and provides ferry access to and from Angel Island and North and East Bay destinations. This site is covered by BCDC San Francisco Waterfront Special Area Plan. And is part of the plan's northeastern waterfront geographic area. The Ferry Building, located at the edge of the city's financial district and downtown area, is home to a variety of commercial uses and office uses, and is surrounded by many similar uses. It is also part of the waterfront's extensive public recreation and access network. So here you can see the Ferry Building and Plaza in relation to Pier 1, which is actually where we are meeting today, and the Ouida Plaza, an adjacent public access space. The area around the Ferry Building and Ferry Plaza is covered by a number of existing BCDC permits, each with its own public access conditions, resulting in a layering of different access requirements from different eras of the site's development. I'll summarize these briefly to provide some context for some of the changes being proposed, as well as for some of the surrounding access connections. Since our last presentation of this information last April's review, we've taken another close look at these permits and refined our understanding of these access requirements. So as a reminder, when we talk about the Ferry Plaza, we're referring to this open area on the bay side of the Ferry Building, enclosed by the Golden Gate Ferry Terminal and this restaurant structure. All of this is located, located on the ferry platform, which is also known as the BART platform, which was all fill authorized by permit 1967-011. The 1967 permit required public access on the perimeter of the platform, not required for ferry operations. The area wasn't specified in a permit exhibit, but was described in the text of the permit special conditions as the perimeter of portions of the platforms that are not required for ferry port operating purposes and that do not interfere with berthing ceremonial ships, that in no case shall be less than 35 feet in width from the edge of the platform. So this depiction is based on that description. Permit 1973-010 authorized both the restaurant and the Golden Gate Ferry Terminal. The permit required the entire plaza east of the easterly wall of the Ferry Building as extended south across the BART platform, except for those areas occupied by the ferry terminal or required for access to the restaurant, to be used exclusively for public access. It also required the second floor public lookout at the ferry terminal as public access. The requirement for the Ferry Plaza was later transferred to the 2001 Ferry Building Rehabilitation Permit. So you'll see that cutout here is shape. So permit 1990-008 was for a number of roadway improvements along the Embarcadero and for the Muni Metro. It required the dedication of public access area for the Embarcadero Promenade between Broadway and Harrison Street. Amendment 6, approved in 2007, authorized the use of a portion of the dedicated public access area to be used for outdoor dining. These include the 30-foot wide areas shown on either side of the building's entry portico, which have come to be called the cafe or market zones. Permit 1997-007 authorized additional fill for North and South Ferry Portal, a publicly accessible sheet pile breakwater, and the promenades around the Ferry Building, as well as the demolition of Pier 1/2 to the north. The dedicated public access areas required by the permit include the new north, east, and south promenades and Pier 14, which is the breakwater. Note that the south promenade here was dedicated based on an older configuration of the Ferry Building and wharf that changed with the remodeling of the building and the construction of the new Ouida terminals and plaza. The 1997 permit also required the reservation of the new concourse with the Ferry Building and a 12 to 15 foot wide corridor between the Embarcadero and the South Promenade for public access purposes. These areas were not required to be dedicated at the time to allow for the flexibility to consider potential revisions to the public's use of the area if and when the building was renovated. Permit 2000-001 authorized the Ferry Building Rehabilitation Project and the use of the Ferry Plaza for the farmers market. As the rehabilitation expanded the second floor of the building over the existing East Promenade, the promenade was expanded 12 feet bayward to provide continued uncovered access. The required dedicated public access includes the East Promenade space, 2 10-foot wide pass-throughs through the ferry building and cafe market zones to maintain free of obstructions, and the ground floor public restrooms, as well as the ferry plaza, which was transferred from that 1973 permit. And permit 2016-001 authorized new gates for the WIDA San Francisco Bay Ferry south of the Ferry Plaza and included public access conditions for the WIDA Plaza, also called the Embarcadero Plaza, and a bayside promenade connecting the new ferry gates. These areas are outside of the scope of the current project, but we're including this information so that you're aware of these closely connected uses immediately adjoining the project site. And then here are just some contextual photos to orient us and help you visualize the current conditions at the site. Here's the North Cafe Zone and Arcade. Here you can see GOT's outdoor seating area, the north pass-through entrance. And at the time, they were in the process of setting up additional outdoor seating. And these were taken last April on a Monday morning. The North Arcade here is also used by a variety of commercial kiosks. Here's also the North Arcade last April on a Saturday evening. And then here's the South Cafe and Market Zone with the outdoor dining area and South Pass-Through. And the South Arcade, which is mainly used for storage and farmers market operations. And these were from last April. This one in the bottom left was from this past December. And here's some views of the Ferry Plaza. This one on the top right is a view from the Gandhi statue facing towards the south side of the building. And then just under that is a view of the space on the north side of the plaza next to the Golden Gate Ferry Terminal, facing east toward the restaurant structure. And all of these were taken on a Monday morning last April. And then here are just 2 quick views of a crowd arriving at the plaza from the Golden Gate Ferry. So these are pedestrians and cyclists all making their way to the south side of the building across the plaza. Also 9 a.m. last April. Here's the area on the south side of the ferry building we've been calling the South Promenade. So this provides access for both pedestrians and vehicles to the ferry plaza. So here you can see the area that's reserved for public access alongside the drive aisle. That's also used by delivery and service vehicles. These cones and barriers here are used to control vehicle access. And this is from a morning last April between ferry landings, so it's pretty empty. And then here are just a few views from when the space is a little bit busier. Wednesday afternoon last December, a Thursday morning in January during a ferry disembarkation, a Wednesday evening in February, and then Saturday afternoon after a market in February. A little blurry, I guess. So lastly, here's some photos of the Saturday's farmers market. So here's the South Promenade area again during a market last April. And then here are just some comparisons of the space on a Monday morning versus the Saturday market. So very, very different conditions, I would say, between the two. And then here is what our community vulnerability mapping tool showed us about the area. So downtown San Francisco is a densely populated, diverse community, and the degrees of social and contamination vulnerability indicated by the tool covers a broad range. Generally speaking, indicators associated with higher social vulnerability in the areas near the ferry building include renter occupancy, no vehicle ownership, as well as some combination of limited English proficiency, very low income, no high school degree, disability, individuals over 65 living alone, non-US citizens, and people of color. And then regarding potential sea level rise, using current site elevations, this map shows what 24 inches of sea level rise would look like if the site remained unchanged. Using the Ocean Protection Council's 2018 sea level rise guidance, 24 inches of sea level rise is equivalent to the mean higher high water level under the medium to high risk aversion, high emission scenario at mid-century. So at this level, there's potential for flooding during a 100-year storm event. And this shows what 66 inches of sea level rise would look like if the site was unchanged. This roughly corresponds to the mean higher high water level at 2090 and the medium to high risk aversion high emission scenario, as well as the 100-year storm condition in mid-century. And in this scenario, the project site and much of the waterfront would be inundated. So just a reminder, following this agenda item, the port will be providing a briefing on the San Francisco Waterfront Coastal Flood Study, which should provide some more context on the port's area-wide adaptation efforts. All right, and then here's just a quick refresher on some of the major topics of discussion from the previous review on April 10th of last year. Note that the project description has changed since then, most notably in the removal of the Bayfront Kitchens alterations to the east side of the building and the Ferry Plaza kiosk from the proposal. In their review, the boards were concerned that public spaces and amenities would be removed, but that the demand for them might not be accommodated in the new design. And we're interested in seeing metrics for amenities such as seating in order to compare existing and proposed conditions. It was noted that the ferry building and surrounding public access areas are an equalizing space for tourists and local residents alike, and they were concerned that the public nature of the site would be reduced. The boards discussed how the gravitas of civic architecture contributes to the public character of the building and plaza, and how more substantial materials could ground the public areas of the site, while more playful, lighter materials could help define the private commercial areas. The boards also discussed improving the continuity of materials and design between the proposed project and neighboring civic sites such as the Ouida Plaza. Members noted the importance of the transportation program that the plaza supports, and that the space plays a significant role in making connections to all modes of transit. Members expressed concerns that with the transition from public transportation hub to more private uses, they also suggested considering the pathways that draw people to the plaza and different destinations of the site, and finding a balance in wayfinding between using the building as a landmark, using design elements and draws, and appropriate signage. All right, and then before we pass this over to the port staff, I'd like to quickly summarize the questions in the staff report that we'd like the board to consider in your review. So first, please consider how this project meets the public access objectives provided in BCDC's public access design guidelines. And then staff has also identified some specific questions we'd like to ask the board about the design at this stage. These are: 1, do the proposed alterations reflect the civic nature of the ferry building and potential demands for public uses of the site? Is the civic nature of the building and surrounding public spaces supported by the materiality and design of the proposed project? 2, do the proposed alterations sufficiently maintain or enhance circulation and connectivity to and along the shoreline? 3, do the proposed activation areas along the building frontages collectively and individually promote an inviting and usable public access environment at the ferry building and allow for adequate public circulation to site entrances and destinations? 4, in particular, would the proposal to place a cafe, market zone, and public seating area in the South Promenade activate and improve the quality of the public access experience in balance with addressing the public access and circulation needs of the project area? And then 5, do the proposed elements support a cohesive, legible, and inviting public access program? So first, I want to check to see if the board has any clarifying questions for me on anything presented in this introduction.
Any questions from anyone?
I have just sort of a technical question. Those permits all stack on top of each other. None of them undid anything from the previous permit.
So I think the one, so some of them do, like they reference one another, but that 1973 and the 2000 permit were the one kind of that specifically transferring the responsibility for the Ferry Plaza over to kind of a new permit. But other than that, they kind of just all like lie on top of each other like that. Yeah.
Okay, I'll just jump in here. I just want to acknowledge that Stefan Pellegrini, board member, Pellegrini has joined the meeting. So we have that on the record. Thank you. I don't think there's any other clarifying questions, so we'll move on. Thank you.
Great, Catherine. So then I'll pass it over to Dan Hodat from the Port of San Francisco to present the port staff report.
Thank you, Catherine. And I want to remind board and committee members that when you do speak up loudly. Although we tend to pick up very well for those that are watching online, but we don't pick up so well for those that are sitting right here. So please remember to use your big voice. That's what we say. Little ones visit. Okay, I want to summarize a few points about Hudson's proposal. Hudson Pacific Park Properties is the proposer and the current leaseholder for the ferry building area. On their purpose of the ferry building project, as stated in the staff report, is to improve the public access and visitor experience, clarify and enhance pedestrian circulation around the ferry building, extend visitor hours to also make the building an evening destination. It's kind of a 10 to 7 building at the moment, and accomplish these goals while minimizing changes to the building's historic significance. Architecture, excuse me. At this second review, Hudson's design team will focus on 3 areas. Enhancements to activate the Embarcadero frontage, which include weather protection in the arcades and other entry areas on that west front of the building, and canopies to shelter outdoor dining in the 30-foot width area adjacent to the building, which is a public access area described specifically as an outdoor dining market zone. That's first. The second is along the south end of the building. They're proposing furnishings, lighting, and identity features to activate this side of the building and to strengthen the pedestrian character of the area. This is an area there would be changes to the public access definitions and lines, as described by BCDC. The third is in the plaza behind the ferry building, Ferry Plaza. They'll describe minor improvements to extend uses into the evening and for special events. Regarding that plaza, answers to some questions that came up at the previous meeting, Golden Gate Ferry does not have immediate plans to alter their facility other than to repair existing floats. They've mentioned longer term ideas, but it's unlikely to be within the next 5 years. The second of the port's working with a broker on Ferry Plaza East, which is the restaurant at the far end of the plaza. There is a potential tenant. Port's early in the discussions, and changes are not likely to occur for at least 2 years. And we don't at the moment anticipate that this would impact any of the proposals you see in front of you tonight. The Waterfront Resilience Plan, which will be the next item on the agenda, describes ideas for how to protect the ferry building during rising sea levels. The team is working with the Army Corps of Engineers on the flood study. Implementation would not be for 5 or more years. And the last point is Hudson is aware of all of these items I just mentioned and is aware that some of their investments could be impacted by future projects. That's part of the responsibility to take this on. So we also have questions for the committee, not different than the board. I have 3 I want to focus on here. 1, will the enhancements along the Embarcadero side of the building activate this frontage with inviting cafes and public spaces? And will it continue to allow appropriate views of the building, the historic building? Second, along the south end of the building, will the proposed cafe, market zone, public seating area, and driveway with the sign and signage features activate this area, that collection of improvements that are planning? And will it add clarity to the circulation out of the building and from the Embarcadero Promenade to the plaza and back? And will it improve its pedestrian character? You saw images of it in Catherine's presentation a couple minutes ago. And the third is, do the proposed elements together support a cohesive civic design compatible with the historic district? With that, I'd like to introduce Chris Pearson from Hudson, who's going to then introduce the design team.
Thank you, guys. Thanks. Good evening. Sorry.
Oh, do I need to pull it up?
Good evening. My name is Chris Pearson. Senior Vice President of Development Planning for Hudson Pacific. I appreciate the opportunity tonight to talk about our enhancement project and talk about our role as stewards for this building. You will hear from our design team. You will hear from Jane, who has led us in guiding the Ferry Building over the last 20 years. But I did want to provide some context before we got to it. This project for us is so much about our stewardship and so much about our partnership with our tenants. It's really to continue to engage with this building and bring it to life at all times. Today, the building is open from about 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. every evening. We lose activity at about 6:30 p.m. as ferry riders go home for the evening. Kind of pre-COVID, our tenants were experiencing kind of an uptick in sales, which has allowed us to really rejuvenate the ferry building marketplace by focusing on women-owned and BIPOC businesses. Post-COVID, what we've seen is a 20% decline in sales. Those sales are really attributed to work from home. We've seen our tourism levels back to pre-19 levels, but our tenants are still recovering. And they're also dealing with an increase in food costs, labor costs, everything else, and trying to balance that with operating at this historic building. Our hope and our desire is to find ways to activate this building into the evening and to really attract individuals, to let them know the Ferry Building is alive and well in the evening, and really encourage our vendors to stay open past 6 p.m. How do we do that? Well, this year we're focusing on lighting the building, which is something you'll see in the coming months, hopefully, where we'll light up the exterior and the interior of the building to really announce to the city of San Francisco that the building is alive and well in the evenings. Two, Jane and her team have focused on really trying to provide events for civic engagement. Last year, they hosted 55 events on site with the hope to increase that over time. Really providing free opportunities to engage with the building and expose it to the broader city as everybody knows it is, but really give our vendors opportunities to engage with the new customer base, both in the daytime and throughout the evening and on weekends. Over the last several months, we've been really focused on coming down to the brass tacks of this project and working with our partners to come up with an opportunity that we thought supported some of our most important tenants like Foodwise, but also gave us an opportunity to bring the project to life. And so what you'll see and what you'll hear from Carl and team today is really how we really want to activate the Embarcadero, how we want to light up the Ferry Plaza in the evenings to really attract folks back there, and how we want to activate the South Promenade to show people this building is a lived and experienced organism and not just the architectural gem we've come to love so much. I think some of the questions that we had in our previous presentation was about public access and public seating. This project will allow us to create 56 more public seats. On the South Promenade, we'll be able to dedicate an additional 236 square feet to public access, all things we feel like meet the overarching goals of both these groups today. I'd now like to introduce, I'm going to skip forward just a bit, but I'd now like to introduce Jane Connors to give you some context for our stewardship of the Ferry Building.
Thank you, Chris. Good evening. I'm Jane Connors. I'm the general manager of the Ferry Building, and I've had the honor of running the Ferry Building for the last 20 years and being a part of this team. It's a remarkable opportunity. And when people ask me, what is it like to run the Ferry Building? I always remind them we're not just property managers. We truly are stewards. We are looking at ways to make the building better. We're looking at ways to make the community engaged and better and make our events better. And one of the things I'm really proud of in the last 4 years, and I think Dan and Mark Piaz would agree, is we restored the building facade, culminating with the restoration of the 245-foot clock tower. So we take historic preservation very seriously, and we're really proud of that accomplishment and bringing in local artisans to do this kind of detailed work on completing the project. And one of the best parts of our job is handing keys to these merchants. So when we hand keys to like Senor Sisig or Ober's Hummus, Peaches Patties, or Grand Creperie, it's one of the best days ever. These food artisans have been waiting to open at the Ferry Building. It's a culmination of what they are working for. And in the last year, we brought more vendors in. Reams has opened an Arabic comfort food shop right in the central pass-through. We opened Fatted Calf, who started Ferry Plaza Farmers Market over 20 years ago. A year ago, they came back to the building and are really thrilled to be rooted in the community where they started. And we announced Nai Yun's new Cambodian restaurant at the south end of the Ferry Building 2 weeks ago. And again, somebody who's totally thrilled to be a part of the community of businesses at the Ferry Building. And I wanted to highlight Kiba Conte. He's at the top left photo. So Kiba grew up in San Francisco. He spent his childhood on the waterfront fishing with his dad. Little known fact, his mom is a longshore person that worked on the San Francisco waterfront. She celebrated her 80th birthday yesterday at the Ferry Building with a birthday party. But when we went to him with the opportunity to work at the Ferry Building to open a shop, it was again the culmination of what he's worked for in the last 10 years. To be able to hang his hat here and say, this is where I am after all this hard work. It's really remarkable. But the other thing about being a steward at the Ferry Building is also listening to tenants and about what they need to make their businesses succeed. And in the last 20 years, we've expanded shops. We've made their shops better. And in the last 4 years, the great assessment of COVID is listening to these tenants and what they need. And it's outdoor dining, it's better lighted, it's extending the experience beyond lunch and the 3 days a week of the farmers market. You know, and so I think what we're proposing today are subtle changes, but great enhancements to prolong the experience of the Ferry Building. And one of our most important partnerships is with Foodwise. That's the nonprofit that operates the Ferry Plaza Farmers Market. I've had the honor again of working with Lulu and Christine are here tonight, and Andrea, thanks for coming here. But we've listened to them too. And we've listened to them, you know, and since last April and making changes to this presentation and to the proposed enhancements. But again, I'm really proud. In the last 4 years, we never closed one day during the pandemic. They operated 3 days a week and provided nourishment and connection, a very, very important part of what we've gone through in the last few years. And starting 4 years ago, prior to the pandemic, we were producing about 4 to 6 seasonal events a year. And we started to realize, let's bring in in-house marketing and events team to really help cultivate the community connection with our partners in different community neighborhood groups. And over the last, Chris mentioned, we've produced 55 events. Last year, we're planning on 150 events, and that includes cooking classes, yoga classes, music, etc. And these are recent activations with community groups from the Chinatown Dance Troupe and the Lion Dancers during Lunar New Year. And then on the back plaza, we're doing activations like the outdoor yoga class, the nighttime activation skate night. We have a monthly plant market on Sundays, and of course our music during the Thursday and Friday lunches during the summertime. But again, it all boils down to ways to make the Ferry Building better. And what we're proposing today are these enhancements that will bring the building into the evening and other days of the week. And I'm going to introduce Carl Cade.
Thank you, Jane. Carl Cade, Vice President of Construction for Hudson Pacific Properties. Coming to Hudson, a big part of the excitement was to be able to work on this project with Jane and her team in order to make what is already a great success an even more special and active part of our city here in San Francisco. I and our design team, led by Lotta Kocharovsky from Page and Turnbull and Sarah Keel from Einwiller Keel Landscape Architects, are going to take you through what we're doing. I think what Jane really tells us about that's important is that the design is really driven by the people that make the Ferry Building experience. So much of the building will and needs to stay the same by virtue of its heritage status. But I think the people and how they need to be able to use the space is what is driving what you're going to see today. So since we were last here, we've been working with a number of groups and we've made some modifications. Some of you were here with us last year, and you'll see that we've really pared back and focused on the most important areas to support our merchants and the other people that make the Ferry Specifically, we're gonna have 3 key areas across the front. The North Arcade with the Cafe Zone in front of it, the South Arcade with the Cafe Market Zone in front of it, the Gateway area, which is a huge opportunity that we sometimes call the Wedge, for obvious reason if you look at the plan here. And then finally, an actual reduced scope where we're really just looking at lighting specifically on the back plaza. That's much needed to make that a space that can be well used into the evening. About what you're not going to see or what we've removed. First, in working with Foodwise, our farmers market partner, we decided to remove the kiosk from the back plaza and go further and really limit any fixed obstructions on the back plaza that make it hard not only to operate the market, but also to load in and load out of the market. And Foodwise is here today. Second, we removed the bayfront kitchen component from the center back of the building. It's really just not core to what's most important right now. And so we're focusing in on what's going to most drive the merchant needs and the merchant vitality. Here you can see a quick preview of what we're looking at in the front arcades. This is the North Arcade. We've got merchants, and to be clear, many of our merchants are both restaurants and food purveyors for takeaway and prepared foods, fully occupying those front arcades and spilling out open onto the cafe zone. It's important to note here, and if you can see it in the rendering, in 2003, roll-down grill gates were put in as a part of that project. So we went back to that same location and looked at the way in which those are installed behind and separate from the building arcade, and are looking at how we can create a movable glass panel system that will be open during the regular daytime when the building is generally functioning well, and have that open condition that we would like to have, and then have them when it's cold or windy and into the nighttime, be able to have something that would be closed. Today, those roll down arcades that you saw earlier, they still don't do much about wind or temperature into the evening. And so that's one of the important things to notice here. The cafe zone, as you see, is lively, is projecting life onto the Embarcadero frontage, including dining zones, seating, and public seating along the front. And actually over towards the portico, there is also public non-dedicated seating added there, in addition to the canopy. We think the wedge and the, as we call it around the office, or the gateway, as we're starting to call it more publicly, is a huge opportunity. There, we now have a great neighbor in the Ouida Plaza. The building itself, with the restoration complete, is looking beautiful. But in between, as you're going to see, there's a real kind of question of what to have. This will give us a chance to better frame the existing driveway, and both with the cornerstone that mimics the Ouida Plaza and with the marquee sign announcing both the Ferry Plaza, and you can't quite see in this, but individual gates and directions for those gates down below. We think this can be a really special place. We also are going to introduce a new cafe zone towards the rear left portion of this, and a new public seating area that will benefit from the warmth of this being the southern side of the building. Finally, and this is really quite simple, we really need great lighting out on the plaza. What you see here, the only change is having a series of lights that we'll talk more about, that make this a place that everyone would like to spend time well into the evening. So with that, I'd like to call up Lada Kocharovsky from Page & Turnbull.
Thank you very much, Carl, for a great overview of the project. I'm Lada Kocharovsky. I'm an architect, excuse me, and principal with Page & Turnbull. I was part of the design team, preservation design team in 2003 when the renovation of this building, bringing it to become the new destination in the city. And I'm part of the same firm that wrote the design guidelines in 1978 that defined the approach to rehabilitation and adaptive reuse of the ferry building. And I can assure you that in the proposed design, there's nothing that we see that contradicts these design guidelines. So as architects, our goal is to meet the client's needs, and we're faced with million questions and million problems. As preservation architects, what's paramount to us is making sure that for the magnitude of significance that this building is within the context of San Francisco and nationwide, we are bringing design interventions that are compatible and sympathetic to the fabric of the existing building. So as Carl outlined the arcade proposal and the cafe zone, our focus is to bring warmth, light, and consistency of the design along the west facade of the building by integrating new uses, the restaurant uses that will occupy the arcade. But the character of the building is not changing at all. We are integrating new glazing system that will remain open the majority of the day. They will only be closed at night when restaurants are closed, and when on a few days we have weather that is not really comfortable for the visitors. So that's the purpose of this intervention. And the outdoor area with the canopies, what they're doing is they're framing the space for outdoor seating while remaining completely flexible. We have an exhibit here that actually helps you orient yourself a little bit. These images side by side tells you what the character is of the arcade and how it's being used by visitors. On the left and on the right, how we envision it will be used with a variety of visitors and public uses. The benches and the seating along the edges of the canopies are open for the public and will not prevent anyone to be using the building, just as people are engaging the traffic, that pedestrian traffic that goes along the Embarcadero. Right here, this may be a little bit faint, but it gives you a sense. This is a plan that shows how the seating is being planned within the canopies that restaurants will be using. But on a market day, we envision it being pulled back because it's completely flexible. The barriers can easily move to the back to allow the use of the area by the farmers market, and these are the tents layout that we contemplated could easily go there. So that is how we demonstrate flexibility that comes along with the proposed design. And speaking of design guidelines, the big focus of preservation design guidelines is flexibility and reversibility. And what we're proposing with the canopy structures is completely reversible. They're light, they're airy, they serve to organize the space for outdoor seating and engaging visitors. Here, we're looking at the view of the arcade from the nave, and it shows you that the focus of the design here is to maintain the transparency of the arcade. There's no barriers that we're planning. So anybody who sees the arcade in the images that Chris shared before with the view of the length of the arcade, this view will remain unobstructed with future interventions. This is how this is a good example of how you read the arcades now, and this is how you will continue to read them once the project takes place. We wanted to show a different angle, and there were questions about previously of how and where the new glazing systems will be installed. So the roll-up gates that you see right now that we showed you in previous slides, this is exactly the location where we're going to be installing the new glazing systems. So essentially the interventions that took place in 2003 that were meant to be reversible are being replaced with a new system, but the system that allows visitors to be comfortable inside the building. And this is the view at night when
on those days when the weather is not friendly, this is how we can see people are gonna be enjoying being inside those spaces. But the systems are transparent and they will look inviting and warm from the outside and the inside. Side-by-side views, on the left, daytime, on the right, nighttime of the same space. And just to touch quickly on the materiality, the civic nature of the building calls for the respect to the original materials. What we're introducing in terms of limited changes and very, very limited interventions, the storefronts, for example, we're using the same color scheme and the same palette that exists on the building now. The new canopy structures are gonna be, again, using the darker steel frame. The frames are gonna be painted in slightly darker colors that are complementary to the existing materials. And here in the next slide, you can see how the canopy structures are providing this engagement of the traffic that exists today by inviting people and activating this front of the building that right now is underutilized. So we're very excited about that. With that, I would like to ask Sarah Keel to speak about the exterior improvements to the plaza.
Thanks so much. It's great to be back and to show you all some response to your design feedback from last time. For the record, my name is Sarah Keel and I have a firm called Miller Keel Landscape Architecture. When we started working on this project, it's obviously a place of a lot of gravitas and seriousness, and we were trying to solve a problem of arrival and of knowing when you got here, but also when you got to the building, but also when you got to the plaza, and how you knew where to go. And over the history of the building, it's changed. It used to be water where Rita Plaza is, and it was more directive when it was water. And so some of what we studied was how it changed as you moved through space. So when you're approaching the building, you sight on the tower, but as you get closer to it, the tower actually disappears and you kind of lose your bearings. And so we were looking at what would it take to feel like you knew where you were going, whichever direction you're going, and what would make it feel welcoming and public to be going here. And we showed you this diagram that has really been our North Star for thinking about arriving at the building along this south edge. And so it's a sort of secondary crossroads that works in relation to the crossroads inside of the building, but completes a kind of circulation experience that allows you to move inside and outside the building and activate all of the spaces around it. It works as one system rather than an interior experience and an exterior experience. What we heard last time we were here were a number of things, but I'm going to highlight a few. I think there was concern about the materials, the amount of color. Was this really going to work for Foodwise and the farmers market? Did it really work for someone rushing to a ferry? Did it feel truly public when you were here? And I think those were a lot of terrific comments, and we really continued that conversation over the last 6 months to a year with people who use the space every day, and had a lot more conversations, which got very much into specific things around operations. How does this place really work? There's a built architecture, but there is also a sort of programming and operations side, which we attended to in our thinking. And when you arrive here today, particularly at the south end of the building, it's a bit indeterminate. It's unclear exactly where you're supposed to walk. It's unclear exactly how to enter. It's not totally clear when you get to the Ferry Plaza. And those are some of the things we started to solve with our interventions. So our interventions are quite a bit scaled back to the last time we were here. And we're really building on what's come before us much more directly. So for example, we've added a cornerstone seating element that is almost a piece of a glacier that cleaved off from the Ouida Plaza. We've added the gateway sign and kept that to announce you entering Ferry Plaza. And we have activation and spill out from the building on the eastern half of the wedge. And all of those things together begin to suggest this is really a pedestrian place and give you some cues for how to move about, and we've enhanced that with some ground markings. The actual things that we're using to do this, we really want to feel like they're part of things that are already here. So the Ouida Plaza granite, the proportion of the seating, the way that we're building that cornerstone is going to relate very directly to the materials that were used at Ouida Plaza. The Ferry Plaza signage is taking a lot of cues from a traditional gate to a ferry, but one that you'll be able to see clearly from Embarcadero. And when you see those things laid out on the plan, they're working together with elements that are already here. You can see the seating that's spilling out and those two identity elements that we have. You can also see a mosaic medallion and some ground markings that are further helping to define the space, but we're being really careful not to add additional fixed elements that get in the way of things that FoodWise is doing out here and allow flexibility for setting up the farmers market. The idea for the medallions came really from two things. One is there's a tradition inside the ferry building of these mosaics that relate to the market hall. There's also one on the mezzanine. There's also a sort of wayfinding medallion at a gate to a ferry. And we wanted to use these medallions at each of the entrances to the ferry building to cue that this was a place of public entry. So as you move between outdoor seating and other things, this tells you you're really supposed to enter here. And it seemed like an opportunity to tell a story about the waterfront, either animals that are part of our waterfront or perhaps boats. And we would work with an artist on the final design of the medallions. On the backside of the Ferry Plaza, I think you've heard everyone saying a lot of things are working here. And there's a kind of, civic ecology, I would say, that's happening here because you have the farmers market. There's also a really great lunchtime scene on a sunny day where people are using the tables and chairs that are being put up and down by Hudson Pacific. The picture on the bottom right really shows the problem we're trying to solve, which is right now you almost don't perceive that there is this space back there at night because the lighting so falls away in that area. Our design proposal is very small. We have a series of lights that mark the edge, kind of the way that lights can mark the edge of a roadway to sort of clarify circulation. And we have additional seating that's being added just to expand the use in that area during lunchtimes. This is a view then of what that might look like at the sort of dusky commuter hours when someone's moving to catch a ferry with some additional activation. Maybe someone would choose to linger. It's those small decisions to do one more thing before you go home that could really make a difference for a lot of the small proprietors here. And we see just clarifying the circulation, adding the lighting as being things that could really be game changers in this area. So I'm available to answer questions, and with that, I will hand it back to Carl.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thanks everyone on the team, and thanks to the committee we look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Okay, so the next thing we'll deal with is clarifying questions from the proponent presentation. So I'll just go down the row here. Any clarifying questions? Go ahead, Stefan. Any clarifying questions?
I have one question.
Yes.
Which I think came up before, and it was the relationship between.
Speak a little louder, please.
Yes, I will.
Thank you.
The relationship between the proposed lights here. Oh my goodness, look at this. the relationship between the proposed lights and the Path of Gold streetlights that are actually located in Justin Herman Plaza out front. And I was curious about the height relationship between.
To clarify, Justin Herman, or there's so many plazas around the site, so I want to.
The ferry building, the plaza that's directly in front of the ferry building, the Path of Gold lights and their height there, and the proposed lights that actually are carried around the sides of the building and introduced in the back.
Yes, we looked at extending those lights as an option, and we ended up selecting something a little bit shorter, and in part to keep with the proportion of the building and where they hit with the architecture.
I had a question about the just the cafe permit. Maybe this is for BCDC actually staff. Does the cafe permit on the Embarcadero side allow for permanent structures or just temporary structures?
It doesn't mention structures. It's just that it's allowed. I mean,
It's an allowable use to have outdoor dining and the market space. That's how it's defined.
It doesn't mention anything about any permanent structures. Okay.
Although it allows for like plan review of like the proposed use. And so, for example, I think the GOTS and the kind of unused space on the other side, the southern arcade, or like the southern cafe zone. Both of those have like those permanent fixtures, but like the rest of it doesn't.
Thank you. A question for you all. Thank you for the presentation. That was very helpful. Will the seating on the wedge be associated with any of the indoor uses, or is that kind of general seating?
It's both. The seating immediately in front of the entrance on the wedge is for public access, so not associated with the indoor use, but anybody can bring out their goods and have a seat or just walk up and have lunch. The eastern portion of the wedge, the hope is to actually activate the Fox City's flea space right now, potentially in the future as a potential cafe use. We'll bring people back and show the activation and kind of life that we're trying to achieve.
And then just because I'm curious, is there a reason why you're not including the South Arcade and that cafe space in the project right now?
Yeah, look, so currently that space is leased to Foodwise. Our hope and our goal is to continue to work with them to activate that space. As we work with them on their business plans for the future and what that space could be, that's when that arcade would really be considered for improvement. But it's just, right now it's utilized for storage, but for Foodwise and their teaching kitchen, all things we want to continue to support. So it's just an evolution process that we'll continue to work with our partners on.
Thank you. And for staff, are we reviewing, would that be part of what we're reviewing here at a later date, if that is amenable to all parties, that would be approved, or would that come back to us?
In the South
Arcade Cafe Zone.
I would say consider it right now because it's being proposed as like kind of a bigger picture later date thing. I think because the details are most fleshed out in the northern area, like you can kind of focus your comments on that. But I think if it all kind of can move forward together, it likely won't come back here when they get around to it.
And we acknowledge there's a responsibility of symmetry in terms of the exterior. It's just important that Foodwise is Foodwise and is not a restaurant, right? So physically from the exterior, there will be symmetry.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. I had a question regarding the wedge area and the paving that is meant to kind of guide people further towards the plaza in the back. Can you explain kind of reasons of where that new paving starts? And I noticed it doesn't extend to the curb line. Is there a particular reason for that?
So the new paving is really just a graphic that's in the driveway, and it stops at the light ribbon, partly out of deference to the light ribbon, but also just as clarity for other pavement things that are happening. The geometry gets strange as it keeps going.
While you're there, the sign that says Ferry Plaza, who is that intended to inform?
That is intended to inform people arriving primarily from the Embarcadero and looking for the ferry plaza or looking for ferries. And it's something that actually we batted around quite a bit, and it was something that was desired by many people who run ferries and other things back there. So it was an element that, I'll be honest, I was at first ambivalent about, but it was something that was seen as operationally really useful.
Okay, thank you. Did you?
I would just add, it sort of tells you about mental geography, but many people are not aware that the plaza that they visit on Saturdays is also there 6 other days of the week. And so I think there's an important role of pulling people, even semi-regular visitors, back to that public location and announcing that that is there as a public plaza.
Okay, interesting, thanks. One other question, can you point out what is different in the North Arcade from what you presented last time? Or is it primarily operational due to the flexibility?
I mean, the design is substantially the same. I think maybe it's more clarity on the operation side of it. I think there's been questions on, is it going to close the space? Our goal is to keep that space open and enjoyable. We think even its use as a potential cafe does provide for that activation. I mean, today we have kiosks there. We have about a 9-foot walkway that really just serves as access to those kiosks. We think by being able to close it in the evenings, it will make it more attractive to potential users, both customers and potential restaurant users. But in the end, the design is exactly the same, but it's operationally being more clear on how we plan on utilizing particular glass facades.
Great. So my question is, when you move the railings to make room for the tents, in the render, they kind of look like they're part of the architecture, which is good. But at the same time, you need something flexible. What is that really going to be? And in terms of serving alcohol, does that height of barrier work, or might something taller appear?
So I think this is actually where there was a refinement, because we got clarity that needed to be a movable horizontal piece. And so there we go. So here in that kind of middle of top, you can see the spec of what we're looking at. So I think it needs to be formidable enough that it does its job, but movable as well. And I think that's what we're proposing.
And our goal is not to have that grow. From an alcohol licensing standpoint, it's about defining the space. I mean, we could define it in a number of ways. So this is just the design solution we're using.
Thank you.
Just a clarification on the seating. So the area is open from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m.
The ferry building is open from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. That's correct.
Okay, and so the movable exterior seating, does that get packed up every night, or
It does. I mean, unless we're having events, yeah, we have porters who essentially move that seating in and out and stack it up as necessary.
Right, and so the new additional exterior seating that's movable would have that same management.
Same management, that's correct.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So could someone explain how the arcades were used in the original ferry building design, how people use them? And it seems like that's not necessarily what they're being used for now, I'm not sure. And can you also explain how what the proposed use is the same as it is now, or the way it was before? Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. So the building has evolved in its history, obviously. So the arcades initially were partially used as storage space. There were limited circulation, public circulation there. As with the latest renovation, arcades have been maintained as a circulation space. They have not been used programmatically for anything other than circulation. Was there another question?
So I think that if you look at the life of the ferry building, so in the original conception, there were times where there were in some of the arcades, there were actually ticket booths. At other times, it was actually where you loaded and unloaded freight that had come over from the mainland. I think as a part of the 2003 version, they were not used as ticket booths and freight, and I don't know the exact date when they last were, but because the first floor was all freight processing, much like an airport would be today. We have had both food-wise, importantly, in the South Arcade with their storage and their kitchen that they open up and actually do different programming in the South Arcade. And then in the North Arcade, you have had these kiosks. The problem is the kiosks have a limited kitchen capacity due to their construction and form. But this actually is attempting to have better functionality, but with similar qualities of the space.
If I'm not mistaken, the kiosks have been there since 2015.
That's correct.
So they've been activating as sort of publicly accessible customer base for since 2015.
Yeah, thank you for that. I always thought they were a place you could run if it was raining. But and then I have one more question. So when ferry passengers are queuing up or staging to go into one of the gates, do they use the ferry building at all, or like especially in inclement weather? How does that fit into your plan, or is that changing at all?
Well, it really isn't changing with this. What people have typically done is many ferry customers we find on rainy days basically time their trip very precisely from their office and are coming through the building rather quickly, making it more important that we have those wide open lateral passageways through the building. But some people will come and be inside, and so it's when it's raining.
But I would say overall, we're not impeding on any
No
space
change.
that's called out for ferry passenger load.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to the WDAC for clarifying questions. Maybe just go down the row. Yeah.
You were asking me.
Yes, go ahead.
Do I need to turn any speaker on? Okay.
Do you have a mic? I think you have a handheld mic right there.
Thank you for all. Which one? Okay. Is this better?
Maybe hold it up.
Is this better? Thanks everybody for great reporting and sharing your meeting minutes and your staff report with us. It was very informative after almost a year to really get into the deeper questions that you were all touching on in your reporting. There was one particular aspect that struck me, and I'm not asking my questions necessarily in the order of importance. I see a comment in the staff report that the information about signage for future restaurants was not discussed. And given that the new restaurants with the arcade now being occupied by them are a very important part of the public image of the building, I'm wondering why you decided to keep information about the signage out of this discussion. I believe personally it will have a great impact on how we perceive the building as in its public nature. Private signage on restaurants or retail is always something that is informative but does not necessarily contribute to the public nature of the expression of the public nature of the building. That is question number one.
Maybe we should just go take that. Maybe I could ask the proponents to talk about how the process of signage works and
I think on that, and staff can also answer. I think at this point we did not have a specific proposal in mind, not having merchants in hand precisely. So we were figuring that there would be scrutiny, and whether there are principles set forth by this group or whether that staff implements or another process, we're open to that.
But I would also just highlight, I mean, in our opinion, signage is important a lot of times for restaurants, but in the reality of it is this activation that we're aiming for on the Embarcadero does allow for people to know that there's something there to experience. So we do think just having that activation can diminish the need for audacious signage that may take away from their overall experience.
I'll just hand to Dan.
Okay. Yes, shortly after the ferry building was renovated in 2001, I think opened a little bit after that, we had the ferry building team develop sign guidelines for the building that address the many tenants that are on the inside. And we've administered that throughout this 20-year period. And it's been very successful in doing an appropriate level of signage. It did not reach to these outside arcade areas. That was not anticipated at the time. I believe what would happen is, should this proposal move forward and restaurants go in there, we'd ask the Ferry Building team to bring on a historic architect again and further these sign guidelines and document that so that when tenants come, tenants go, so that each one just has to fit into that box of how the sign guidelines address. So it would be a consistent quality. And those don't exist at this review yet.
Thank you, Dan. Okay, go ahead. Next question.
My second question would perhaps be directed toward Ms. Connor. I think after 20 years of management, she gave a great description about the nature of tenants, the very kind of emphasis on homegrown smaller businesses expressing the local character. My question to the Hudson team would be, what possible tenants are you envisioning for your restaurants? The lease steps of the restaurants is actually directed more towards smaller restaurants. Perhaps was looking at the Gods as an example, which is more a not fast food, that would be a very unfair description, but quicker food type of restaurant. What are you envisioning to complement what Ms. Connor has been working on for so many years?
Yeah. Well, I think, we, as I said, speaking about the stewardship, we're always thinking about what's additive to the building. And I always say we need a butcher, baker, candlestick maker at the Ferry Building, and we have that. But we also are looking at what's additive to the building, and we meet consistently each week and are adding, names to the list of people we want in the building, and we're always speaking with people. Blue Bottle, it took 4 years of discussions with them to bring James into the building, from starting at Minden Alley to the Ferry Plaza Farmers Market. So again, what we've done in the last 4 years is, I think, a great indicator of the caliber of people we're looking for.
Well, as always, the devil's in the details, because I believe the changes of the glass line, including creating private entrances into these restaurants from the entrances moving slightly further towards the facade of the building, will make a big difference in how we perceive these not being privatizing the building. I think that is one of the biggest questions that is being asked by the public and by myself. How can we avoid that closing the arcade is not being perceived as privatizing the building? In other cities where we have arcades, they are the most connective element of a city, looking at Bologna, for example, a few other cities, of how to stitch the city together. In this particular case, the arcades, even if they're only used in particular instances, are an element of stitching the waterfront together. When it rains, when it's foggy, that is where you meet your friends. You're not standing in the plaza or in front of the building or in the back of the building, you're standing under the arcade. I like to let that sit in the room, and perhaps have other people reflect on that as well. I have another quick technical
Can I just
question.
jump in there? I just want to ask the proponent to make a comment, if you would like, just in relation to that question comment. Yeah.
So two things. First, I want to be clear. Every one of the merchants that we showcased are ones that came into the building since Hudson's ownership in 2018. So we only ask you to judge us by our record, and that we have been working closely with merchants, typically people who have come up out of farmers markets like Foodwise, and have over time been ready to take on the commitment of a brick and mortar space. So that is our intent. And if you look at each one of them, I think it's a great trajectory of what we plan in the future. I think the next piece of what we find, and my office is 2 blocks away, so I come here often in all weather, and I live here in the city. What we find is on rainy days, people want to be in the nave. That we actually don't get many people, if they're coming as far as the face of the building, they want to come in and experience the life and the warmth of the nave shops. We are not getting a lot of people traveling laterally, even on rainy days. On warm days, people want to be in front and looking at the building. And so they're not as much in the arcades. And if they were, we would have more vitality in the kiosks that are located there than we have had it for the last, since 2015.
And I mean, I think, like, let's be clear, our overarching goal is to try to bring people inside. We want them to experience the inside of the building, and our tenants to benefit.
Please go ahead.
I don't want to hog the question period here is, do you consider the increased demand for delivery and pickup of the proposed additional restaurants on the front of the building to further put stress on the south end where your primary access for delivery and pickup is?
Yeah, no, we have a very intricate delivery scenario and guidelines in our leases and our rules and regs, and we work closely with all the tenants. We actually worked with the BCDC to prolong the delivery needs because Hog Island is bringing us oysters at certain tides, and Cowgirl Creamery was bringing us cheese during certain times of the day. It couldn't just be regulated to a certain window. So in 2013, we worked very closely with the port and BCDC to tell the story of what our delivery needs are. And so we continue to work closely with all of our vendors on the days, the times and the days they can make deliveries.
My last question, there probably others as I continue listening to other people is, I do not see any back of the house space indicated in your plans. You're speaking about transparency and lightness and light touch, etc. When it comes to refrigeration, food storage, back of the house activities, that has to occur somewhere. Would you be needing to take space from building inside facing stores in order to accommodate that?
So what you can see on the screen, which is really hard to read, unfortunately, but hopefully you can see it in your package, is a potential layout of restaurant space, which shows you their activated kitchen and everything else. So that is similar to how GOTS operates. GOTS is a great example. If you guys get an opportunity to go over there, when you walk in, you see an open concept kitchen where they do have all of their storage and their cooking. And we think that the space configuration is quite similar in this arcade space as it is for GOTS. So those kitchens would line up very similarly as you see today.
And I anticipate that we've gotten this question before. To be clear, I think any chef would love much more space and much more back of house. And space in the Ferry Building is dear. And so part of what it is working with a restaurateur who can fit in these concepts that were designed by Studio KDA. And sometimes that means they have a more limited menu. So it's really somebody who's very specific. That said, it also means you're probably this is gonna work better for a newer entrepreneurial tenant to have that opportunity where they're focused on their 4 great things and not as much on a long menu.
It partially answers my question and not fully, but one last question, that is for the architect. Could you perhaps show a drawing which in enlarged form shows the operation of the glass line pushing into the facade, into the arcade, and how the canopy interacts? You're providing a 6-foot walkway between the glass line and the canopy, and then you have outbound of the canopy benches which edge the public right of way. Would you describe that to everybody in larger scale? It's very difficult to read in your drawings. I would like to get some questions answered about the possible usefulness of this inbound 6-foot space.
Right, and it may be easier to look at the exhibit right here. So it's a little easier to see that in the print form. I apologize for the lightness of the line work there, but you can see that the kitchen, the back of house and kitchen spaces are pushed against the back wall, and that's where operation of the kitchen happens. The circulation inside happens along the outer edge right behind the glass. So there's a path of circulation going along the line. So you don't have the cursor to show it, but it happens, actually I do have the cursor. It happens in this zone right here, and it tracks along the entire length of the arcade. And furniture is movable, obviously, inside, so, but there's enough space, 6 feet or so, allowed for circulation behind the glass line and between the table line and the counter line. So that's the design intent here. Obviously, it's conceptual and will be refined. And then there is, on the outside, there is a 6 foot pathway between the canopy itself and the face of the wall. I think it's easier to see this in this image right here.
You don't have a section drawing, do you?
Not in this, we may have it in the appendix, so I'll be happy to find that. But this image here shows the amount of space that is planned for circulation between the arcade and the canopy structure, which is about 6 feet.
For this group, our responsibility is to talk about the quality of this particular space being public enough to be a full replacement of how we currently perceive the public realm in front of the Ferry Building. And I question that this hidden space, particularly when it is in the front of the canopy, countered by the barriers, that is enough to be perceived as public.
Thank you, Catherine. Let's keep moving. Alma, go ahead.
So being brand new to this committee and having had the benefit of seeing it in the previous presentation, I just have to say that I can appreciate all the detail that went into the collaboration between all the designers and the managers of the space, et cetera, to make this happen. I think all the intentions to highlight the life of the building in the afternoon are actually pretty valid. I had similar questions to Catherine only on this front portion. I think all the ideas that are for the wedge and everything and bringing light into their work, but the 6 feet seem a little bit, tight for that. And more importantly, if we can pair that, or it was more of a question. Is it possible to maintain the 6 foot clear on the inside at the same time? So then you have the sense of coming in and out. And that was just a question when the glass is open. So you always feel like there's a circulation both inside the arcade, like similar to the way it is right now, but also on the outside. And then just out of curiosity, in the second diagram on page 24, when the market is happening, then the sort of the barrier pushes out and that whole space was shown in the diagram is empty. So that means that those at the moment of the market, that space remains not usable for the restaurants.
That's correct.
Okay.
So on Saturday markets, that all pushes, those tables are stored, they can push back and the market's able to set the kiosk events, as you guys have experienced.
And my only question was, is it necessary then to keep the seating going in that edge? Because my understanding is that some of those stands work both sides. So that configuration suggested that they can only function from the embarcadero side. So it was more curiosity if that's the intent, or there's a reason for then maintaining that space, not necessarily connected to the stands themselves.
Yes, so the layout of the Saturday market has been coordinated with Foodwise. There are some occasions where you can have double depth for your tent spaces. So those vendors that need a little bit more space to operate will be able to have that space. But the first thing we did when we kind of last left you was sit with the Foodwise team to come up with something that worked. And just for everybody else's edification, we've looked at a variety of ways to try to provide heat and light to this space. Most of those ways were more impactful to Foodwise than what we're presenting today. As it relates to the glass line and circulation, the way this is designed conceptually is to have those glass walls sort of fold behind the column so that they're not perceived from the public. So you do get that airiness that I think we all want to protect and see. So that is the hope and the intent of the design, as this concept continues to evolve. But it's going to be a rail at the top that allows it to sort of accordion behind that column line. It won't sit proud of that column at all. It'll be inset into the arcades. So it does provide that opportunity for light, airiness, and some liquid circulation. To be honest with you, based on your question as it relates to some of that circulation area inside the space to give that appearance, a lot of the table layout will happen as we identify a tenant and how many seats they want and how it's sort of going to work for them. What we're showing you today is a sample layout. I would imagine that just from a service standpoint, they're going to want a little bit more space to operate between those two points. So I do think you're going to get a bit of walkway on the interior space that you're not perceiving today.
And it'll be subject to fire code as well. So I think, we're committing very clearly to the opening in between the two spaces that you can see right here. And so that will line up to exiting and all sorts of rules.
Thank you. Jimmy, go
Thank you.
ahead.
Hello, is this on?
Yep.
I probably don't need this. I'm pretty loud. No, I just had a minor detail question about the louvers. Are they intended to be operational, as in open, close for weather?
So they're not going to ever provide a hard top. They're really providing shade.
Okay.
We're looking at the best way to have them move. And I think we want to make sure, and we need, and so that's what it is. But it's a shade louver, not
weatherproof.
There always will be transparency, because I think what Carl's trying to say.
Okay, thank you. I was just curious about that.
Laura.
Okay, I'll try and keep this quick. The cafe zone does go to the perimeter, so it includes that. This may be actually a question for BCDC report. The cafe zone is drawn that goes to the arcade on the face of the building. So is that 6 feet required? Or is it a kind of illustration of something that might happen, since it's inside the cafe zone as drawn?
Dan Hodap with the port. The way the permit shows, it is not a required circulation. There's this 30-foot depth that can be used for cafe purposes. And in this case, it includes that 6 feet. It includes the area of the canopy structure, and it also includes where the benches are outside of that too.
The only
That might be my next question. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say the only real sort of like restriction on the cafe zones, like kind of physically, apart from like the 30-foot depth, is in the 2000 permit, they're required to have like a 10-foot clearance like coming out from the pass-throughs. So like that cannot be obstructed.
Particular.
Right, but within the zone itself, it just says outdoor dining.
Okay, and maybe that ties to the places where we're seeing seating added. Same question, is that illustrative? Is there, because it doesn't necessarily fall in any required permit structure, is that right?
No, the area west, the Embarcadero sidewalk is all required public access. There's an overlay of a cafe zone on top of it that is allowed to occupy that space, but it is still required public access.
Right. And the additional seating, so there's voluntarily provided seating on the south as well as in front of the canopy.
That is the public benefit to the enclosure of the outdoor dining.
So it would be required.
That would be discussed in permitting.
Okay. And we'll pass it on.
Thank you. A few quick ones. Would the restaurant spaces in the arcades be heated and cooled?
Jane, you may want to speak to kind of, we are planning for
Some conditioning.
some conditioning, but it's not, much of the building is not
Yeah.
formally that way today. So, I mean,
Yeah, with the open atrium, no, I mean, almost all of our Nave shops and, like the Red Bay Coffee, the Delica, they are not conditioned. It was really designed to use the cool Mediterranean climate here. But the enclosed spaces, like, at the cornerstones, can elect to build, bring in some HVAC, but I think in these spaces.
they'd have to have the Title 24, so when they were open, they could not. Yeah, and it would be something that would be triggered by that. When they're working as an open market during the day, they're gonna be open and they're not gonna. Sorry.
Well, as my colleague Catherine says, the devil is in the details, and if you're conditioning that puts a pretty large burden on your glass system. And also, there is a diagram somewhere that shows a reflective ceiling with a lot of ducts simply for exhaust hoods and makeup air. And if you also layer heating and cooling, space conditioning, that the lovely rendering of the open arcade is going to be different. If this comes to pass and the North Arcade is done and eventually the South Arcade is done, where would all of the food-wise mission critical functions that exist there.
Yeah,
now.
that's part of our conversation. Foodwise has an existing lease for that South Arcade. So our goal is we work to extend them so they can be long-term tenants at our building for my foreseeable future for my kids to enjoy. We would figure out the appropriate space and use of that space that could include keeping their stores there in some capacity. It's all to be worked with. But the general answer is that South Arcade doesn't move forward without working with Foodwise in great concert to make sure that it's something that benefits both us and them, and it works for everybody. I mean, that's our commitment.
I realize we're talking about the North Arcade, but because somebody said that there's likely a precedent being set if that moves forward, there may not be sufficient review on the south side. It's worth asking how that gets accommodated. Two more quick ones. When, and this is for staff, when were the restaurant spaces at the north and south corners enclosed? When were those arcades done? Is that part of the 2000?
Correct. Those were enclosed as part of that 2003, 2001, 2003 renovation.
They were part of the tax credit project?
Yes.
So they passed that hurdle. Okay.
That's correct.
Last question. If this does move forward and does reach the court approvals, and these canopies turn out to be successful, as you hope, would there be potential plans to extend them to service the existing outdoor dining that exists at the north and south end?
That's not currently in our plans. I think what you see today is what our plans are, which is what we think we need to be successful. We think GOTS has obviously done a great job operating as is. We have renewed interest in our market bar space that is there without necessarily the canopy space, but we do think these two locations, because of their interplay with the arcade space and because of how we want to utilize them at night, it is something that's critical.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think that concludes the clarifying questions part of the agenda. We'll move now to public comment, and we'll open the meeting to public comment. Any member of the public attending the meeting in person, please notify the board secretary if you would like to make a comment.
So this is Ashley from BCBC. We did receive a number of public comment letters regarding the ferry building item, so I'll summarize those. We received these letters prior to 10 a.m. this morning, and they have been forwarded to the design review board.
Okay. From the ferry building tenants such as Foodwise and El Porteño, they wrote letters of support with Foodwise stating that they are able to adjust their layouts to the changed configurations proposed in this project. The Barbary Coast Neighborhood Association expressed support for the project and appreciation for the modifications to the project since the last review. The project will allow the ferry building to compete with other proposed nearby projects along the Embarcadero shoreline on port properties. The Gateway Tenants Association expressed support for the project, stating the neighborhood will benefit from the greater activity at the Votive Market. The San Francisco Building and Construction Trades Council expressed support for the project, stating that they are grateful to Hudson Pacific's support of the merchant community and the work for local workers and contractors. And the Telegraph Hill dwellers expressed concern over the proposed project. The letter summarized the restoration design guidelines and identified the impairments of thousands of square feet of public access through privatization, material impacts to the historic architecture, inconsistency with public access policies, and the transformation of the ferry building from public marketplace into a restaurant entertainment destination as their points of concern.
Okay, so we'll now move to public comment, and can people come up or will they be called?
I can call them.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, we have a few people here in the room. I'm going to start with Joe Sanders. If you could come up to the mic for a public comment, and following that would be Rudy Gonzalez. You'll have 3 minutes.
Good evening, members of the Design Review Board. My name is Joe Sanders, and I represent Union Drywall Finishers, Painters, and the High Road Contractors of San Francisco. I'm a painter by trade, a graduate of District Council 16's Registered Apprenticeship Program, and a resident of this city. We take pride in restoring historical buildings such as the Ferry Building. I'm excited to be working with skilled trades workers to deliver this project with care and precision. I respectfully request your support on this item and look forward to putting local tradespeople to work soon. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have Rudy Gonzalez, and then after that will be Christine Farah.
Rudy, and for the row ahead of me in the exit row there, I'm sorry, that's Isaac sitting behind me making little noises on my phone. I represent 27 construction unions in San Francisco and the skilled tradespeople and apprentices at Build Our Skyline. It's probably more rare than it should be that we have development partners who really see their role not just as corporate landlords or people who are going to, I can't tell you how many projects that we think through and negotiate over that are just total privatization of public spaces. And they have cute acronyms like POPOS and things like that that convince us it's worthwhile. And sometimes it is. But I have yet to see a partner like Hudson Pacific really see themselves as stewards. And they use that term, and I think they really mean it. The thought and care that they've gone through, we take very seriously. We have a lot of history on this waterfront, not the least of which includes the general strikes of the 30s and a lot of labor unrest and frankly, citywide painter strikes, which got us the 8-hour day in the city and trickled out through American labor history. This iconic feature is very much a part of that history. And as a native San Franciscan, I'm pleased to see a partner that really takes serious their commitment to honoring this historic landmark. It's a tough time to be in commercial real estate. We certainly felt the brunt of the pandemic, and we still have about 850 people in San Francisco out of work, which is unique. And I think that reactivating this part of the waterfront is really important. I think it sends the right message and a strong message. And it's my sincere hope that with approval and due consideration that this extends into more revitalization, not just on the waterfront, but really down the market corridor. So we're delighted to be in partnership with people who really care about the property that they're taking ownership of. And I certainly appreciate the time and dedication of the advisory committee and BCDC and respectfully urge your support. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Christine Farah, you're up, and then I have Catherine Petrin.
Good evening, everyone. It's actually really nice to be here having such a cordial conversation, given how many changes that were made between last year's presentation and this one. So I'm the executive director for Foodwise. We have other staff members in here who 165 times a year create an event that brings the public down to the farmers market. And I just wanted to put into my own words that we really have been in good faith talking with our landlords, Hudson Pacific, and we're grateful for the changes that they've made. We are excited to renegotiate a lease for the South Arcade. It is true that you might not be reviewing the exact details of that in 4 years when we do renegotiate, but we are working towards a common vision of a teaching kitchen. Our educational facilities are core to what we do. We don't just run farmers markets. We have 3,000 elementary school students who come to visit our farmers market every year. We have a teen program, and the teaching kitchen is core to that, and Hudson is aware of that. So we will be in any kind of future visions for the South Arcade, really holding fast to that view of the importance of a teaching facility. It's also the space that the farmers market usually gets referenced as storage, but it's not. It's actually an active teaching space that we use regularly that does bring a lot of people down to the waterfront that we want to have them feel like the waterfront is for them. So I'm just here in my own words to say we are working together. I'm thrilled with some of the changes that are made. I do think that we can accommodate our market around the cornerstone and the gateway sign and the arcades, and the canopy. But I will steadfastly be fighting to keep our kitchen. and I think that will be quite possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Okay, next we have Catherine Petrin, and last we have Stan Hayes.
Good afternoon, board members. My name is Catherine Petrin. I'm representing San Francisco Heritage this evening. We appreciate having been included in discussions with representatives of Hudson Pacific and their consulting team. We've been following the project since its inception. We recognize the positive changes to the project. over the last year, we're still opposed to the proposed changes affecting the north arcade and the city facade. In fact, city-facing facade. In fact, last year, our comment was, our feeling was that there was a lot of flexibility that could be had at the rear of the building on the bay-facing side, but that the principal facade shouldn't be as impacted. We related our comments to the project sponsor in conversation over the last year and in our letter of last May, and we still believe that the arcade should serve and be recognizable as open and publicly accessible public spaces. The facade is characterized by balance and symmetry, and listening to the project tonight, I'm really even more unclear about the treatment at the south side, the south arcades. If in fact that doesn't come to pass, then that relationship of symmetry is even a bit more off balance. We thought that the presentation had some really wonderful ideas about innovative lighting, and we think that a lower impact alternative that focuses on lighting could achieve some of the goals that are under consideration. I think we all agree that the Ferry Building is our city's just architectural gem. I mean, there are few buildings that surpass it. City Hall, and so we just would really urge the most serious level of scrutiny for these proposed changes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next.
Okay, next we have Stan Hayes.
Thank you very, very much, and good afternoon. I'm Stan Hayes. I'm the president of the Telegraph Hill Dwellers. And the American Planning Association describes the Ferry Building as a famous city's most famous landmark. We couldn't agree more. We know you feel the same way. We acknowledge the changes that are made in this revised project, and we appreciate them. We appreciate them as far as they go. For reasons, though, in our letter that I hope you've had a chance to read, and if you haven't, I have extra copies here. We continue to oppose the permanent enclosure of the historic arcades, the privatization of the designated public access cafe market zones, and the addition of canopy structures in front of the arcades on the Embarcadero frontage. We're concerned by the resulting loss of more than 12,000 square feet of public access. We're concerned that the private restaurant use and the canopy structures in the North Cafe Zone and its eventual replication in the South Cafe Zone are going to impair the architecturally prized sweep of the Ferry Building's public-facing Embarcadero frontage. That it will impair the architecturally, that we're concerned that the project is inconsistent with the important public access policies that we operate under, including BCDC's San Francisco Bay Area Plan, and in fact, the 1978 design guidelines that were referenced earlier. We're concerned that approval of the project's future expansion to the South Arcade and Cafe zones is premature and could pose a long-term threat to the farmers market's viability. Most of all, we're concerned as a basic and fundamental principle that the Ferry Building not be transformed from its historic role as a public marketplace into a restaurant entertainment destination. In reviewing this project, we strongly urge you to consider the concerns here and in our letter. Please ensure that public access is preserved and that the legacy of this great and iconic building remains intact. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we will move to online questions, or is there one more?
Yes, I have one public comment online.
Good.
Robert Harrer, if you could, I've unmuted you, and if you could take 3 minutes to speak, and please state your name for the record. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Bob Hare. I'm representing the Barbary Coast Neighborhood Association, and also known as BCNA. And BCNA supports the revised ferry building enhancement that is proposed by Hudson Pacific Properties. We believe this project will improve the visitor experience and the attractiveness of the ferry building facility. It will also enable the ferry building to remain competitive vis-a-vis other potential waterfront attractions in the future. We appreciate that Hudson has made several modifications to the project after discussions with the port and Foodwise. Most notably, the proposed kiosk in the eastern or rear plaza area has been removed. The project offers several benefits which should expand the appeal of the facility. Not only will it create a more comfortable customer experience, it will also create a better platform for vendors and tenants. We will leave, of course, the detailed technical judgments of the proposal's architectural and stylistic merit to others. However, we believe the current proposal allows the ferry building to broaden and improve its future offerings. We note the port is working on developing 2 other major waterfront attractions at piers 30/32 and 38/40. Thus, it is quite important that the ferry building be given the support now to update its offerings so that it can be positioned to be competitive against those future attractions in the future. In conclusion, we strongly urge approval for Hudson's proposed project. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, I want to let you know that we have one more public speaker here in the room. So Stuart Morton, if you'd like to go to the microphone.
I'm sorry.
All right.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. I'm Stuart Morton. I've been in the preservation community over 50 years. I was one of the founders of Heritage. I was on Landmarks board under Moscone, Feinstein, and Jordan. I got so excited I fell down. How can you imagine the canopies in front of this gorgeous building? They're kind of cheesy. They're probably far enough away, but if you look at it and imagine it, looking at the picture of the ferry building, good Lord, this is not what an historic building should have happened to it. And that's what's happening. It's a happening. What a shame. I can't believe that you would even think about it. It's a very serious approach. I had also a question. How will the canopy affect the wind? I mean, did God have a wind problem? I mean, they're westerlies. Would they have wanted a canopy? I can't believe you'd even think about this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I fell down.
Okay. Thank you. That concludes public comment. Thank you to everyone who commented. We always appreciate the thoughts, and we take very seriously everyone's comments that have been made this evening. So now we go to the next part of the agenda, which is board discussion and advice. And what we typically do is we have a discussion, a fairly structured discussion tonight, because there are a lot of people here for the discussion, and we want to make sure that the critical points are all made. So we have been given, from BCDC standpoint, staff, just a reminder, staff asked us to consider 5 questions within the 7 objectives for public access that we always take as a foundation for our comments. But there are 5 specific specific questions, and so the first question deals with the alterations that are proposed. Do they reflect the civic nature of the ferry building, the potential demands for public uses of the site? And I don't know if we can put the questions back up so everyone can see them. And also, as the civic nature of the ferry building and surrounding public spaces supported by the materiality and design of the project. So that's the first question. Second question, do the proposed alterations sufficiently maintain or enhance circulation and connectivity to and along the shoreline? The third question, Do the proposed activation areas along the building frontages collectively and individually promote an inviting and usable public access environment at the ferry building and allow for adequate public circulation to site entrances and destinations? The fourth question, in particular, would the proposal to place a cafe market zone and public seating area in the South Promenade, or what we call the Gateway or Gateway Plaza, activate and improve the quality of the public access experience in balance with addressing the public access and circulation needs of the project area? And the fifth question, do the proposed elements support a cohesive, legible, and inviting public access program? So these are the 5 questions that have been posed by staff for BCDC's side. We had 3 questions that were posed by Dan Hodap for the WDAC to consider. And I'm just paraphrasing slightly here, but the first one will, the proposed enhancements activate the frontage and continue to provide for all important views to this important historic building and its environs. The second question for the WDAC, will the enhancements on the south end enhance the circulation, the pedestrian character, and the activation of this part of the building? And then the third question, do all of the improvements taken collectively, do they all add up to an appropriate treatment for a historic building and district of this importance to the city? So that's all paraphrased there on those 3 questions. Now, I think what I'll do to start with, and what we typically do, we have 5 questions here, but I'll just ask each of the board members to speak to 1 or maybe 2 of the questions that they feel represents, their interests most importantly, so that we can, and we'll have some dialogue as we go. So, look, I'm going to go to the far end here. Stefan, I'll hand this microphone down to you. And Stefan, if you would like to just lead off with your reflections on these questions, or a couple of the questions.
Thank you, Jacinta, and thanks to our presenters and all of the analysis that has been done on this project. It's good to see this again. I think I'll say that I'll start maybe by saying that I appreciate a lot of the changes, and I think where I would maybe start or focus, I think has to do with question 3. And maybe I'm not alone in trying to grapple with this nature of sort of what is perceived as a loss of public access with the filling up the portions of the loggia. And also understanding that the loggia today is not a high quality public space, and it's also not very transparent into the building, and that these improvements would actually address those things to a certain extent. But the nature of public access, I think there's sort of still a question there. So maybe one way I've been trying to sort of think about this is that if there is sort of a loss of public space on the ground, is there sort of a nexus or an enhancement or increase in public space around the building that can be seen to sort of balance the enclosure of a portion of the building? And if those 2 things can actually sort of be seen to counter each other. Because I think if you even think of a historic building going through an evolution where a loggia is filled in, certainly seems to be a viable option. But what we have here is a building that is sort of entirely sitting within our BCDC jurisdiction. Yeah, so this nature of really trying to sort of maximize public access here. So one could argue that the enhancements to the South Promenade and to the area behind are increasing public access to sort of balance or counter what's lost in the loggia. But I don't know the answer to that question. Because I would say that the South Promenade appears greatly improved over what we saw before. But I think there still is this question in my mind, and I would sort of invite some discussion on that topic about if we are looking at a proposal that's seeking to enhance public access, and if that's sort of our job, what about this proposal is actually doing that? Stop there.
Okay. Look, let's keep going down here. I'm mindful that we will just see how the topics expand, how the topics progress here. So, Stefan, and you're making some critically important points there. So we'll discuss that.
Thank you.
Further.
Thank you so much for the thoughtful presentation and all of the comments, and thanks also to the public comments that we received. It's really nice to hear kind of the full set of responses that people have. And I also really appreciate coming down to the brass tacks of the project. I think previously my concerns were about removing public seating that were supporting the market hall aspects and kind of shifting to more of a classic restaurant approach instead of a kind of a market hall approach. And that was primarily in response to the Bay Kitchen. So I'm personally pleased to see that the public seating in the Bay Kitchens area is maintained. I also appreciate hearing more about what the tenants need and how you're engaging with the tenants and supporting them, as it's a very difficult time to be a retailer right now, especially downtown. So I think that was really helpful framing. And I also appreciate y'all working with the market. I think that was a really important component of the project's publicness and accessibility. I think it's like one of the major SNAP resources that's available in San Francisco. So I think that was a really important aspect of public access to food in this case. So this may be controversial, but I believe that overall, I think this is a building that has changed a lot over time. And that's what's made it work. And I don't think we should be afraid of the building continuing to change to keep up with trends and land uses, particularly at this moment in time where we're seeing our downtown struggle to bring life. And I think seeing an operator who wants to kind of turn up the dials on bringing life to this really important destination downtown is great. I think we should do everything, within reason to support that. I think activating the building with successful retailers and ensuring the success of small scale retailers here is a really important part of the success of this building and the concept that this building is always represented, which is sort of see the best of the Bay in San Francisco, our kind of local makers. And I think that'll really benefit, bringing life here will benefit our whole downtown district. And I think this building provides a number of really unique public access assets. It has usable seating that's comfortable, indoor usable seating, bathrooms that you can easily go to. When there's sun, there's a place to sit in the sun. When there's wind, there's places to sit out of the wind. So to me, that's kind of the main, that is a really wonderful public access part of this building. And I'm not a historic planner at all. I'm not a historic architect, but it's my personal feeling that public access that is not actively being used as public access, like the arcade space, which is really cafes right now and storage space, I agree with Stefan. I don't see the quality of that space, and I don't think preserving it as public access just for the sake of square footage of public access is the right approach. I think this isn't a building just to look at, it's a building to be activated and used and loved and to support these successful businesses. So I think that with regard to the North Arcade and Cafe Zone, the key things to me here are sort of three things. There's a sort of a hierarchy that we can read in the facade. There's the main entry, that's kind of number one most important. There's these end caps, which are kind of number two most important. And then there's these central arcades between them, kind of the wings. And I think that this idea of holding the glass behind the line of the columns
lets us read that arcade. I mean, what the arcade is doing is it's giving us this sort of depth of facade, the substantialness of the building. You can read the depth of these big columns. Holding the glass line behind those does help those read. And then I would just say that the thing I'm struggling with is these canopies, which to me sort of make those central places feel like more prominent in this tripartite hierarchy or five-partite hierarchy or whatever we're talking about here. And I think if those cafe areas were a little bit lighter touch, more fold away at night, less substantial than GOTS and Market Hall, then I think that would actually reflect the kind of architectural character of the building. In terms of the use of that space as arcade space, as retail space, I think it's great. Bring light and life into those spaces. I want to walk down the Embarcadero and see this building just full of people and light at night. I think that would be incredibly wonderful. It's a cold building. Give me conditioned spaces where I can be comfortable at night and see the life on the street. I think, to me, that is sort of more fully in line with the vision of this building when it was renovated as this really fully public space. After, pulling down the Embarcadero Freeway and all that, there's been a major project to make this part of the waterfront really public. I think actually bringing more life to the ground floor of this building, light on the street and all of that would help make it kind of more fully realizing its vision. And then the last point I'll make is I think that wedge is a fantastic idea. I want to sit on the southern part of the building in the sun. I want more places for people to sit outside. Every time I go to I work in Shack 15, and which is in the Ferry Building, every time I go outside to eat, there's nowhere to sit in the sun, and I would love more places to sit outside. So I think that's fantastic. And just the last point is on the South Arcade, I think I would apply the same logic, which is a lighter touch, keep the kind of depth of facade evident, enliven it with uses. If there's going to be, cafe seating outside, it should just be kind of like lighter touch and keeping this visual hierarchy of this kind of like tripartite building structure. So that was very long.
Look, can I just jump in on that for a second? I really agree with everything you said. Very clear, very articulate. The canopy, are you referring to this on the cover, this over the top? Yeah. My reaction to that, just as a person who goes down there on that side fairly often, when it's hot, if you're sitting in GOTS and you're out in that seating area, it is incredibly hot during summer. And so I actually thought that canopy was a pretty light touch structure, but providing much needed shade. So, I liked the way you described the building and the breakdown of the building, or the composition of the building. But if you look at this rendering on the first image in the exhibits, I think to your point about evolution over time, I think that's a fairly effective way to improve the comfort level for people and, public seating.
Could you achieve it with umbrellas, I guess?
You could, as a possibility, yes.
I don't feel strongly about it.
Yeah.
If somebody else feels strongly about it, great.
And, the market, after all, has its market days, there's lots of, temporary structures in that zone. So, yeah. Patricia.
Yes, thank you. What I've been thinking throughout the presentation is that I would summarize the challenge here as how do we activate, support these small businesses and balance public access? And I have some of the same questions that Stefan has in terms of, how do we quantify or evaluate per square footage, literally do, that conservation of public access. Given that the proposed design is meant to be flexible and reversible, I think that that lessens my concern, and also given the fact that public access there is not of high quality. So I kind of agree on a lot of the points already made. So I'll kind of redirect my focus on Ferry Plaza in the back and the fact that it's incredibly underutilized. And I do think the proposed design will help, and I agree that the wedge has a lot of potential to be an inviting space, to welcome people to stay on the wedge, but also direct people through the back. And my question about the marking extent was because I'm wondering if you would only see that marking and then some of those key moves to invite people in as cues that there's something exciting behind here, please come to back. I don't think you'll see them until you're right in front of them. And so I would just invite people to explore how to extend those moves either to the curb line. I understand that this might be outside your project area, but as people are walking up and down the Embarcadero, I think there's an opportunity to really, create a cue further back that is not currently in the design. So I'll stop there and hand it off to Gary.
Gary?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, given the kind of economic trough that the city is in and the Market Street corridor, the ferry building can and should, I think, play a really important role in reinvigorating, and it can be kind of like an acupuncture move, if you can activate this building, it will spread out from there. And I think we do all agree that the preservation of the building is really, really key. But I also think that preservation of a building, reinvigoration of a historic building is part of preserving a historic building. And so I kind of agree with what others have said, that if it's flexible and it's removable and it's light and it is not a permanent, doesn't touch the building, it's set away. I'm sort of okay with the arcades if they're doing the job of activating the building. So I see that it's really tricky. I really respect everybody's opinion that's come out today, because I think the activation and the preservation, if you want to be a purist in terms of preservation, are counter purposes. So, luckily I don't have to decide, how you, resolve that. So anyway, I think also the climatic modification of the arcade, the new structure provides is good with the shade, and in the render, it looked as though there was radiant heaters in there hanging from the structure. That seemed like a good idea to me, so that it deals with the heat, but also for when it's cool. And I was even wondering if there was some kind of roll down, windscreens or something that could come out of those arcades as well. Though I know that umbrellas and any kind of fabric creates problems with the wind. So that's, I think, the North Arcade. I want to make one comment about the connectivity to the waterfront. I don't know if it's possible to bring up the one image. There's a couple of perspectives looking towards the water from the Embarcadero on the south side. I think there's two perspectives there. But the signage at the end, to me, is as much of a barrier. It's maybe more of a barrier than an invitation. And I really like the way the signage and the granite is kind of at ground level, so it's there if you're looking for it, but it's not in your face. I think there, in that one image, it says, Ferry Plaza, Ferry Building on the ground, and it says Ferry something on the building, and Ferry Plaza again. So it seems redundant, and I think people will find their way there. If you're a resident, you know how to get there. If you're a commuter, you know how to get there. I'm not sure why that sign is there. And if it does have to be there, then I just think that it needs to be very, very carefully designed with the same degree of care as the canopies. I especially saw the way that sign meets the ground, and as soon as you put a obstruction in a traffic area, now you have to do a big concrete footing at the base to keep cars from running into it, and it just made me realize that wasn't fully designed. I know it's not fully designed, but as it goes forward, if it goes forward, I hope you'll keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary, and excellent comments. Bob, I'm going to hand to you. Why don't you?
Thank you. I'll be quick. Yeah, it's a beautiful building. I feel a little out of my depth here as an engineer and not a designer. in the sense that we're talking about here. I'm concerned about the kind of the conflict between some comments about wanting to keep the arcades open space and to maintain public open space, and the desire to activate the space and to change the use. And I've been thinking, and I can't think of a way to mediate that. I think that other board members had some great comments on how to do that. So I'll just give my time to the other board members.
Okay, thank you. Well, for me, I think I'm not going to build on what the other board members have said. I think it's, I agree with everything that people have said. And I think for me, the critical question that, I want to address is the question of the publicness of public space and the evolution of public access over time. And I think for those of us who have worked on improving or creating public space over the years, you do see a constant evolution of how public space is used. And, what may be very effective for 5 or 10 years then may become redundant, and then something else might become more effective, more appealing to people. So while I know at BCDC, we have to have permits and we do establish precise square footages, I think when it comes to the public space around this building, the precision of how many square feet represents a compromise that cannot be walked back from versus a compromise that might actually enhance the overall public sense of quality of public space because of other things that are being added in there, or other attractions or other destinations, can, in my mind, be a reasonable justification for being able to compromise a little bit on these square footages. And I think in the South Plaza, I think what is proposed is a very positive enhancement. I actually like the wayfinding aspect of that Ferry Plaza sign. Gary, I agree with you, the detailing could be refined, but obviously there would be time to do that. But I know from the standpoint of the type of visitors who come here, not everybody really knows how to find all the different ferry, which way to go, left or right, for the different wharves. And I think that was actually quite a useful thing to have there, as well as the additional signage. So I think that is very well handled. And I won't repeat what was said about the arcades, but I do think that evolution, viability, activation, comfort are really critical aspects for public space. And I think this proposal has done a good job at creating that better environment and focusing on those areas. So look, I think that with that, I think I'll hand over to the WDAC. I think we've pretty much touched on the 5 questions here. So staff, please clarify if there's something that you feel we haven't handled adequately. But let's go to the WDAC and those 3 questions that you were asked to look at and discuss. Thank you.
Catherine, please.
I can speak loud enough. Can everybody hear me?
I think use the
microphone. May I say for introduction that your questions 1, 3, and 5 very much resonate with me, and I wish I would be allowed to comment on them. They were very thoughtful, and I very much appreciated Jacinta's summary, including specific aspects that are very important to me. I personally actually received 5 questions in my memo, of which Dan, I think, summarized three, and I'm gonna try to identify the questions because the way he stated them, they were slightly differently phrased than what you said, so I will try. Do the proposed design enhancements reflect the history and civic nature of the ferry building? I think that is a big, big question because over time, the ferry building, as was presented today, particularly with respect to looking at history and many challenges over time, has gone through many, many changes. What is our responsibility is the building as it is, beautifully restored to a historic building that we all feel is of extremely important civic nature and civic presence in the city. It does actually anchor the city between City Hall as unalterable and the ferry building, where land meets water. And I think that analog for me leaves the building itself so precious and so important that I have very little tolerance or appreciation for those changes of which I see too many on the west facade. Given Hudson's mission to utilize and activate the building, I'm very much in support of everything that's happening on the south side. Again, some of the design choices in detail can probably be elevated and can be staying as a longer discussion. There are certain aspects which I think we could all discuss of improving on. However, it is the building itself and what we are suggesting on the west side where I have big questions. Most and foremost, I believe I fully support the idea of activating the building. However, the canopy as proposed, from my perspective, is extremely static. It is so static that it actually changes the perception of how we perceive the building from the long view, from across the street, as well as how we see the building or don't see the building well when we are on the sidewalk in front of the building. The canopy is too massive, the canopy is too long, and if the rhythm of the arcade gives us a clue for activation, then I believe that the motion of the arcade is being obliterated by the static nature of the canopy. You have like waves and all of a sudden it's all flat, it's covered, it has lights on it, it's very regimented, and I think it wipes out the dynamic of what could be. Earlier today, Alma made a very important point that immediately sparked my curiosity, although we're not here in a real design discussion, when she said, consider of how you could basically utilize or furnish the space underneath the arcade in a slightly different way. And I think there are other ways of doing that. The second question, and Dan, you need to correct me if I'm not quite hitting the right number here based on what I was writing and what you said. Would the proposal to place a cafe market zone and public seating area in the South Promenade activate improve the quality of the public space? I would say most likely yes. I answered that. Another one is, are the proposed canopy structures along the west side of the building compatible with the historic district? And do they continue to allow the appropriate use of the building? The answer would be no. I summarized that. Do the proposed improvements enhance circulation and connectivity to and from the Fair building, the Embarcadero Promenade, and the Fair Plaza? My answer would say, in the way it is delineated, I would question it. My answer would probably be no. What starts to really concern me is that the changes that need to be made to the ground plane 3 times during a week create an element of too much activity and haste that takes away of perceiving a strong public space as being really there. There's constant changes. And I like the dynamic, what's happening on the South Plaza and in the Wedge and beyond. But as it addresses the front of the building, I am concerned about that. Those would be my comments.
I think many of you have said many of the things I probably will have to say, and I was just gonna suggest that, I don't know how this works, but we do have three different spaces in which we're looking into and I guess eventually evaluating, and that is the wedge, the plaza, and that front of the building. So definitely, if we're talking in those three terms, I think the proposals being made for the plaza seem pretty reasonable to me in terms of focusing on light. The ferry plaza sign, the only question I was gonna ask whether that would also include the function of providing that separation for traffic, because right now you have this temporary barrier that doesn't necessarily look that great anyway. So going back to the point of what currently is happening can be improved by having that arc being functional for that separation, or that separation is no longer necessary. So in which case, then I prefer honestly to have a more design element that incorporates all those functions that the ferry plaza will require, and that then feels a much more welcoming and clear element to include, given that it is definitely gonna go through, as you know, the design to be done carefully and integrated, so it feels very friendly to pedestrians, while at the same time barriers cars when needed and if needed. So in that case, I think from that perspective, I think that's fantastic. This whole area on the wedge and the reactivation, I couldn't agree more. That space, when you are in the market day, it feels like the most amazing place. Most of the time when I've been there, it always feels like it's an empty market space, which actually is the whole point of these new improvements that I think will change that perception. So I'm pretty much in favor of all of these, and whether even sort of to Patricia's comment, whether it has to come out or not, I don't think in essence people need that. Once you begin to see it activated, you will understand that this is an inviting place as opposed to the back of house, which is my perception currently today. That brings us back to what I'm perceiving in the conversation, the more controversial. And from my perception, I would probably lean on the side of saying we do need to support our vendors, our restaurants, our bars, everything in the city today is becoming more and more paramount, that we actually go a little bit above and beyond in order to reactivate all of the areas that we all enjoy. And to me, the biggest conundrum had always been, why is the ferry building has such a limited schedule? And it is because we don't know that it is open late. And so the whole notion of whatever needs to happen to activate that, I think I'm very much in favor of. I am not a retail or commercial expert, but I do know that all of those activations in reality are a bit of a gamble. You have to test something, put it out there, see how it works, and then evaluate and revisit. I presume some of that will play a factor in how this activation happens. I couldn't agree more that I am a fan of Blue Bottle in the world in general, and that location of Blue Bottle at the ferry building seems like something that somebody forgot to finish up. You really feel that you're under some kind of temporary situation. So currently, the activation or the publicness of that space, I think in my mind as a user of the city, not as a designer or anything else, feels somewhat, am I supposed to be here? Or this is the back of house, like, you know, how the slanted door used to have the out the door thing, like this is a little thing where like there's a Blue Bottle inside, which indeed there is one. So there's this whole perception of what happens on that arcade as a secondary function. I think this proposal is the current risk, the current gamble to try to figure out. I do think that there are many things at the minute level of design, whether that perception of 6 foot or of the grandness of that movement is perceived correctly or not. And it's not about the 6 foot dimension. It's about, I think Patricia was bringing that up about, it is making it work, not necessarily fight over feet and inches. And that's what I was bringing up the question, can we think of this parallel axis that feels pretty open? Because currently right now, my perception only in terms of what Goth, that's the right pronunciation? Goth, sorry, no H in there, Goth. Is that is definitely pretty inaccessible unless I go and buy a burger for them, which I haven't is really great. But if the idea that I'm seeing here for this proposal is not quite like that, it is perceived as something that you can come through, go through, pass through, and I think that's the big difference that I see. And so from that regard, the light, the glass, all of those things I think are fantastic. I do wonder, I think the benches that are proposed to be in front to kind of delineate that I think they were introduced as a public benefit. And I wonder if that's necessary in this context of keeping this perceived as much more flexible than what Marketplace and GOTS is doing. Because those two spaces don't feel as public, let's say, as the other. And so I'm just wondering if it's a decision of those little elements that may have been perceived as I'm giving you something in return that perceptually is making us feel this is more private than it should be. Because I do think the intention, and I believe wholeheartedly that this is meant to be pretty public. And it's just some of the things, even though they physically are allowing public access, might be projecting an image of not being as public as it could be. The question of the trail is in my mind is again part of this idea of activating within a little bit of a gamble. Do you need the shade in order for them to be successful or not? And that's probably the question that we need to ask, is whether shade is a must or a good thing to have. And in the presentation, to be fair, I don't know if I heard that is a deal breaker if some person decides to put a restaurant in this location without the canopy or they would be like, I'm out of this game. This doesn't work unless they have some ability of shade in there, and that maybe that's something that we can clarify. And that may bring another way to evaluate the value of that canopy within the context of what we're trying to achieve, which is activating that edge.
Yeah, so I'm sort of going to echo some of the same thoughts that have already been brought up. I think it was Kirsten. Everything you said was kind of what I was thinking about. I completely agree with. The Ferry Plaza area, I agree. I think the proposed updates are reasonable. I think the Wedge Plaza area also seems like, that's kind of the right thing to do in that location. I will say that the ferry sign, yeah, I'm not sure also how I feel about it, but I do know that I was recently in Hong Kong and there were moments in these crowds that the only way I could wayfind was to look up. Yeah. And so I think that might be something we want to really just think about when it is crowded and, you can't see signs that are at ground level. So I think that's important. And then as far as the south treatment, yeah, I think I agree with the idea that it is not well-used space. And I used to come here a lot to the Ferry building during lunch and on weekends. And these spaces were never places that I would want to be. My dog would not even want to walk under them. And so I think, we really need to think seriously about, how valuable some of this public space is if it's not being used. And we have an opportunity here to make them more publicly used. And so I think I would want to keep that in mind. I think the other thing I would just add is, and this might be controversial too, is the idea of the canopies don't offend me. I think if they're done right and are finely detailed, they can actually accentuate the architecture, the historic architecture. I mean, I think they're really great examples throughout the world. This country, Asia, Europe, where the integration of a modern structure or even support systems into historic architecture, when I see them, I think it's beautiful. I think they actually accentuate the historic architecture in many ways. And this one's a little bit hard to read because you see this sort of powerful line across this canopy across the south face, and I'm trying to figure out if I were standing across Embarcadero, would I really perceive this canopy, which at least in the renderings appears to be very porous. If anything, I think looking at the renderings, I can still make out the historic facade of the building. So, without that kind of rendering, who's to say whether that's really that dominant or not? I think, again, if it's done well, it could help to sort of light up the elevation of the building. So, I think there's no any comments.
Okay, I'll go through the three spaces. I'm I think we're agreement Ferry Plaza, it's restrained, it's really not that big a change, and the lighting makes a lot of sense. The Wedge Plaza, I agree with a lot of the comments. I do think that, I mean, in some ways it's counterintuitive that the graphic is on actually the vehicular surface, but I can appreciate that's where the like visibility of the figure and you're trying to drive traffic, foot traffic. I think the comments about devils in the details, and I know this is really surface treatment, but it's gonna get probably choppier, like with crosswalks and things. So that I will put faith in the design team and the like process to kind of find elegant ways to resolve how that thing fits in to things. I do, you know, it's not for WDAC to maybe comment on the permits, but it is the public access. It feels strange to me that there is like, we're moving pieces of permits around, but we're not, but we're maintaining a pattern on the south that doesn't actually have to do with the usage and the circulation. So I see that this is like a first move in the added proposed public access requirement, but I would say it like, you have pinch points and it just seems strange. So this may be a moment to think about, is there an opportunity to clean up actually what's important about the public access on the south? And then on the arcades and the northern, I think agree. I have concerns about the southern being something we have no real notion of what the details are. So I'm not really comfortable that that is a thing that just gets rolled in. For the northern, and I should say overall, I really appreciate the thoughtfulness and the restraint and coming back. And I think this presentation was really well organized. And I hear the nighttime goals, which I think is a really important one. So to me, then the canopy is about lighting and heat, actually maybe more than shade. And so that can we achieve that? I've come to kind of agree on the arcade, the possibilities of arcade enclosure. I think some of the things I feel like I take issue with is the things that feel like they're gestures to maintain publicness, but they're not, right? So even, it maybe is actually about fire, but the passage between the two restaurant spaces, it's not really, maybe that's, I don't know if it's preservation or fire, but it doesn't seem to me about like public circulation. I like where Alma was going about actually affiliating it with the outside space, especially with opening up those arcades. I am in the same, I think, thinking of like some hesitation about the canopies. I appreciate, Kirsten, how you talked about that. And I do wonder the length. I mean, 115 feet is pretty long. So that is, I think, thinking about how can you downgrade and maybe straight on, like I do think that aerial view on the front cover does like do a better job of convincing, but that's not actually a view any of us are going to experience. I am curious to the datum, like what the height set is and how you can see through and the arcades. Thank you. Okay, I will look at that. So that it's not obscuring from a distance. And I do think that is a privatization. So Alma, I don't know, I'm reading that as like, that is a controlled perimeter most of the time. And I know it's like meant to feel airy but it is a controlled perimeter. So I would like to see emphasis on additional seating in other places, which I think would support, I mean, finding a seat over there sometimes can be hard. So I support in general. I think, you know, design-wise, it could be talked about. So I'm going to give I think the non-conclusive on the canopy. But I think my recommendation would be, I think it could be done, but I'm concerned about the details. I'm concerned about the footings. I'm concerned about how the perimeter really works in the end and whether it should be one singular length.
Thank you to everyone. One of the benefits of being last is that all the good ideas have been spoken. I have a lot of empathy for everyone in this room from all perspectives, including the Heritage and Telegraph Hill, and as well as the applicant and the architect. Is a thorny problem. I'll keep my comments to the arcades and the canopies. I think everyone has had very good comments about the plaza and the south side. I will note that the 2002 project, which was pretty controversial when they cut the holes in the floor, and people were very concerned about that, and that turned out to be the right move. And it was, argued about, and people who argue about the Secretary of Interior standards can come to very different conclusions, all in goodwill and good faith. To my mind, the arcade's fundamental nature changed when their ends were enclosed. They ceased becoming connective tissue, and they basically became covered outdoor space. So that the north and south arcade, which is what we're talking about, really don't connect to anything. And in fact, they're already privatized. And they're privatized in a very ad hoc and not very successful way, where their 22-foot interior gracious width has been carved up with these little boxes and kiosks and a little kind of mean circulation area along the north side. And then the south side, as much as, we want to see Foodwise succeed in everything, it's a bunch of storage lockers, except on, when the kitchen's operating. So I hope with the successful lease extension that they can actually build something that's more permanent and visible. So I do support the enclosure of the arcades, and the rendering, if you could go back a couple, it shows that view of the restaurant. This one. Side by side, yeah, those are a good juxtaposition. And I have two minds of this. This to me restores the spatial characteristic of that arcade. And you can kind of see in the background, there's a little box that's the back of the house. I'm very concerned that once you layer in the ductwork for hoods and makeup air and possible space conditioning, and you do a more realistic version of what a back of house in a restaurant looks like, that we're going to approach more what we have now with simply a glass wall. And so, boy, is the devil in the details of these restaurants. And I do note that while GOTS is successful, GOTS has about 10 feet on the other side of the wall. And while everyone wants to watch exhibition cooking, nobody wants to watch exhibition dishwashing. And so that's really going to make or break this. As to the privatization of the public realm, I would say that we should keep in mind that the Ferry Building as a whole, as a marketplace, is extremely successful in separating people from their money. And while you can walk through there without pulling out your wallet, I think it's kind of not the point. And a cafe presents a fairly low barrier to entry. For a $15 beer, you can sit there for 2 hours. So that leaves me with the canopies. I'm of two minds. Half of me would rather see a bunch of clunky market umbrellas and space heaters out there that can roll back at the end of the day. But intellectually, I do believe there's a possibility of a successful design for those canopies. I think it has to be very minimal. I think even what's intended now has 2 horizontal bars, and it doesn't appear to be, the lower of which seems to intrude on top of the arch. I would love to see a series of perspectives from across the street from the curb line from, every 20 feet to actually see, without all the beautiful entourage, just showing like with the stuff, with the heaters hung there. And are they clunky or are they streamlined and integrated? How thin can you get this thing? How elegant can you get this such that it can visually recede? And I think there's the possibility for that. I think there's a lot of design work. And I would have liked to see more detail on that. And going forward to future design review boards, I would recommend the applicant do those studies without the entourage that everybody loves happy people eating. Do it in a more sort of stripped down way. And that's one last comment, which is these market lights, which are ubiquitous and are in every parklet in most people's backyards, and you can buy them at Home Depot. I think that this as a canopy element, as in this minimal approach, would be far more successful with completely concealed sources. So you have pools of light on the dining, but you don't drive by and it looks like those cheap lights.
Okay, I think
A couple of comments. I saw everybody's head nod when he said concealed lights. Just wanted to, nobody else expressed that, but I saw 5 heads nod at the same time. And one clarification on public access square footage. This area where the canopy is being proposed was anticipated for this cafe restaurant use in the original remodel permit for the Ferry building. So it's not technically a loss of public space, but this was the intended use, such as Gott's and Market Bar are doing that use. It's not a balance that probably needs to be hit on a square footage for this area, but it's I think a design question, and that's why we have the design experts here.
If we had kind of something to add to your discussion, is now the time to?
Yes, I was just going to summarize. So yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so one of the things that we've been discussing with the applicant and with the board.
A little louder, please.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Sure. So one of the things we've been discussing with the applicants and with the port, having to do with that southern wedge, is the circulation around, I guess, like the north side of the drive aisle, where in the proposed cafe market zone, they would have like some barriers around that seating area, where right now, I guess it's like kind of where the cones are. And so we were curious, because it has been like a topic of discussion as like how that space can be configured. If anybody had an opinion about like that, like circulation through that space, or if, I don't know, if you just like to opine on that a little bit so that we have a little bit of feedback to work with, that would be great.
I'll let me respond to that, and anyone else can jump in. It's an important question, and I think the majority, I mean, I think everyone actually feels very positive about the activation of that area. So this is one of those questions about human behavior in relation to a defined cafe seating zone, when there is still a very large area around it, some of which is defined roadway with certain times that there might be activity on that, but for the majority of the time, pedestrians traverse that really without even, I think, thinking about the fact that they're on the roadway versus a defined pedestrian area. I think the other thing I would say about this is very much a flex zone here from a pedestrian standpoint. And so, you know, the definition of where the pedestrian walks is not, there seems to be a very big area open to the pedestrians, even with the definition of that, that restaurant area with the planters that are moved back and forth to accommodate the market. So I don't see an issue with that. I appreciate that in the end, you've got to define these zones of, you know, what is formally defined as pedestrian versus vehicular, or the other side adjacent the plaza. But I think in this case, the benefits that are accruing from that outdoor seating area and the desire to have that, I think means that the pedestrian area can be accommodated in what I would call that quite large flexible area. Do people agree with that? Do you want to add something?
I completely agree. And I think what's happening around the edge of this building in general is the bump out in front of Gott's and the bump out in front of Market Hall kind of create this like soft, occupiable edge around the building. And it struck public, just square feet of concrete is not by itself great public space, right? What makes great public space is offering different ways to use it. And I think providing these kind of soft occupiable edges around the building and clarifying the circulation patterns and opening up spaces where there's eddies and things as necessary and giving gracious enough space to entryways and all of that is a way of structuring the way to use the building that just makes it more legible. And I think to me, this is adding a kind of a soft occupiable edge in a way that makes this space not feel like a back of house anymore. It's still navigable with this kind of, you can cut the edge of you can cut the corner and kind of go around the edge if you want, moving between the tables. But it does also, on like a market day when there might be people, a lot of people wanting to find a place to sit, it does kind of clearly indicate like where you could sit comfortably without people bumping into your legs and where you can kind of walk without having to worry about bumping into people's legs. So I think giving the space, I think there's enough space here for circulation clearly for people. And it seems like enough space for this kind of nice seating, that adding this structure to this, and I think this also goes for the North Arcade side, giving a little bit more structure and opportunity to occupy these spaces and also have plenty of generous circulation space, I think is a total improvement to the legibility of the whole building. So just to really follow on what you said, I agree.
Can I ask a question? So the like, open public seating is only on the west side of that south facade. And on the eastern facade, what we're trying to get to is like, is that a porous dining area where people can walk through? It's like it's cafe, like the old Starbucks out here, where you can just circulate through. Or is it appropriate or acceptable for there to be dividers and it becomes an exclusive space that the public then needs to circulate around?
I have an opinion on that. I have an opinion. So I think this gets to this idea of like what's measurable. And so maybe the window that I look at that through is that if you can create spaces along the edge of the building where the public can have a good experience in a way that the public can have a good experience along the edge of like a really well-designed commercial building on Market Street in downtown, that we should support that wherever we could get it. And so I was talking to my faithful seatmate here about just this, the edges of the building right now are not so great. And so if you look at them from the standpoint of like, what's the quality of being on the sidewalk in front of the building where there is not an outdoor seating area, it's really not that great. But if there was sort of an active edge that you could walk along, you could argue that you're sort of enhancing a larger portion of the public space in front of the building that is today somewhat inconsistent. So I would look at the wedge through that lens and say, maybe the goal is to try to make a space around as much of the building as you can, where it feels really great to walk along the edge. I mean, I sort of go for that shy zone that where you can actually put people next to the building. You can have entrances and other things that open up. You can have transparency instead of the back of a kitchen store or something like that. It sort of encourages the kind of pedestrian activity that's sort of oriented to the building. So I would be supportive of having that continue around the southern side of the building, but I welcome it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Stefan, the specific question was, if that was leased to a restaurant, would that be acceptable? And I think what I'm hearing you say is yes or no.
I think the answer is that having that publicly accessible space around the edge of the building. Yeah, not restaurant. Or the condition that we're seeing in front of these loggias is that there, in theory, is a passage
right
along the edge of the building between the actual restaurant space and the outdoor seating where I could continue to walk. It's not in the permit yet, but I think that kind of space is something I think that from a policy standpoint, I would support.
But
Yeah.
so just to be clear, in the south, at the south side, so in this rendering,
Yeah.
where the outdoor seating area with the planter boxes is, not the other outdoor seating areas where everyone can sit.
Yeah.
You know, you can see here tables and chairs that everyone can sit at, and then further along, there's a a zone that might be attached to a restaurant that might occupy that corner in the future. This is all might, you know?
Yeah.
But I mean, I feel like that's appropriate. The building is big enough and the offerings are, you want variety, and I think it's okay.
Yeah,
in
there
that
and the
corner.
two
Yeah.
zones are getting closer together, right? So from the pedestrian standpoint, it's not that big of a deal to move
Right.
around into sort of that central spine.
Right.
Yeah. But the idea, again, is sort of walking around the building,
Yeah.
I think it's enhanced through this proposal, but I would sort of see how far we could take that.
Right.
May WDC add a comment into this conversation, or do we need to keep these separate?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to note, and I'm hopeful that the team could work it out, but I'm not clear on how ADA is handled here, and I think that that may send you in different directions, because if you have to have a strong edging for the whole length of that, then you've got, like, because if it's able to be fluid with where the striping is, then I'm completely in agreement. But if you've got an edging that needs to be more controlled than what we're seeing, and it's forcing everyone to kind of crosswalk over and back, that would be my question of, like, attention to that, how that is reconciled.
Alma.
I was actually just gonna react to the question. So the question was, is it appropriate to have a more private zone or less public, let's say, and the other one? From the point of view where we were arguing earlier about whether the Ferry Plaza sign was useful or necessary, or whichever way it's done. Under that umbrella, I think having something that is a little bit more dedicated, presumably constantly more occupied by people servicing and eating or having coffee, in my mind, works as another anchor to pull people into that or in that location, rather than just to leave it all open-ended as public, fully public space in which you have to decide how to activate. Different countries, different cultures, they do that differently. But in the US, you do have to be more instructional. You have to say, this is a good place for you to hang out for a little while. This is a place where you can just hang out for a little while. So I feel like from the perspective of that point of being at the Embarcadero, seeing that corner and seeing there's people always there versus here's people transiting and sitting occasionally, I do think that that's a helpful thing to have. Now, the proportion, the access, how tight it is close to the building, do you leave people more access to your point? I agree that in the proposal is chosen in the right place because it's what it gets narrower. So naturally, your movement of somebody who's not interested in having a coffee will be less abrupt than if you do it the other way around. So from the perspective of what they're presenting to us, I think this is more consistent to one of my questions I need to answer from here, that whether this maintains the perception of publicness, but also we are asked to say, are the features in the signage will add clarity and still permit views? And so I think in that perspective, the answer to your question would be, from my point of view, probably this is the right balance.
Helpful?
Yes.
Good. Okay, so I'm just going to briefly summarize where we're at after the dialogue, before we ask for the proponent's response. So I think I'm just going to look to the areas of consensus. So if we want to check off the plaza, I think everyone feels very positive about the enhancing that through additional lighting and the approach that's been taken. So consensus on that item. On the South Plaza, the wedge, I think there is consensus. Again, all of this is in the context of devil's in the detail, and take on board the comments made in relation to design and ADA and the other things that have been talked about. The South Arcade, I think everybody supports our market operator. Otherwise, I think we're really very committed and want to see you there long term. We want to see the kitchen there long term. It is not clear, because we didn't see any proposed details, and we understand why from Hudson Pacific, that this is not on the front burner yet. And I want to pick up on something that Alma mentioned earlier too, that I think if this is some years down the track, I think it gives a very good amount of time to be able to observe the experimentation on the north, the success of the North Arcade, and fine-tune the South Arcade down the track. So I would say we can't offer consensus on the South Arcade because in a way it's not being presented in detail to us tonight. So I would put that aside and just say we don't need to really resolve that tonight. On the North Arcade, I think there is general consensus that enhanced lighting is good. Activation, drawing people into the building, especially at night, letting us know that it's a great place to be, is very important. I think there's general consensus that the having restaurants, operations that activate the North Arcade is a positive. But, very big brackets after that, the devil is in the detail, the operational complications and challenges, the public movement through these areas of perception of publicness, outstanding questions. And then, of course, the third point that I wrote down that I think there's general consensus on is that cleaning up what's there at the moment, which is really very modest and not really very attractive, is a very positive thing and can only enhance everyone's experience of the ferry building. The unresolved issues, the canopy, again, big brackets, the devil's in the detail. So design really needs to be looked at. Could the lengths be broken up? Can there be studies to convince, to have the designers and the port and BCDC all feel very confident on the character of the canopy, the lightness of the canopy is not going to impact the facade of this very important historic building. The public access under the colonnade, unresolved, and I think that is also tied to the question of the restaurant layouts and operation are not resolved yet, because that doesn't get resolved until you have potential restaurateurs coming in. And so I think there's, that has to all be taken, into further study, which is not really our role as advisors. Our role is to point out exactly what, we've done tonight, provide our concerns and hear the concerns of the community, which we take very seriously, and then provide that guidance so that the really excellent professionals who are responsible for working with the proponent to advance this can do a great job. So there are definitely unresolved issues in the North Canopy, and I think I'll pause at this point and I think hand it to the proponent to make a comment.
Thank you. Thank you for tonight. I think your comments, your both concerns and direction are helpful as we move forward. And we just look forward to the opportunity to work with staff to evolve it. So it's something that we're all proud of when it's eventually implemented.
Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. So I think the final question before us is whether we would want to see this again or not. And my view is that we have provided several hours of excellent analysis by really top-class people, and we've listened to really thoughtful comments from the community. And I don't think it would be productive for us to sit here again and have the same conversation. So I want to recommend that that this now moves, we don't see it again. Although I would say, I would ask that the South Arcade is basically taken out of this for now, and reserved for the future, for some years down the track to, be able to deal with it then. And, if the staff at that time feels that it should come back for further review, then, we should see that when there's more detail on the south facade. But otherwise, I'd say, please go ahead. And I am personally very excited to see some improvement to the Ferry building. I think this will go a long way to accomplishing some, really important outcomes. So I think that's the conclusion on this item. Okay, so there is a second item on the agenda for tonight, which is the briefing on the San Francisco Waterfront Coastal Flood Study draft plan. And should we move straight into it, given the time?
Grab a snack, but yeah. Does anyone need to?
Should we do like a 5-minute break?
Okay, well, maybe a 5-minute break, like 5-minute break.
That's the one easy.
I know. So Ashley, when we're done with the break, we'll have to share the screen with us.
Oh, I know.
Okay, we're back online here. And Luis is with the Port's WRP, the Waterfront Resilience Program team's communications guy. And he's going to give us a quick run through of the flood study. Luis, thank you very much for waiting us out here. I think you can hear me. And
yes.
We still have, thank you. We still have the full design review board and pretty much the full design review board over there, full Waterfront Design Advisory Committee over here. And why don't you take it away with a summary of what the flood study is up to?
Thank you, Dan. Hello, everyone. My name is Luis Barata. I'm a senior planner with the Waterfront Resilience Program, and I think I'm hearing some echo. So if you can mute your...
You should.
But can you hear me okay?
We can, yes.
All right.
We hear you very.
So I will just go ahead and go through it. Well, I want to say thank you, everybody, for having me here. And so happy to see so many familiar faces. And I'm sorry I could not be there in person. I had some family commitments, but I will jump into the presentation. Let me share my screen. Can you see it? All right.
Yes.
Yes.
So I'm gonna talk about the San Francisco Waterfront Resilience Program, the draft plan of the flood study that we have been working on. And what is this flood study? I assume that a lot of you are aware, but it is a study to analyze the coastal flood risk and the effects of sea level rise in the San Francisco waterfront along the 7.5 miles of the port jurisdiction. So it extends from Aquatic Park on the northern side all the way to Heron's Head Park on the southern end. So basically covers the base side of the city shoreline. It is a study. It is a study to address, sea level rise and seismic risks. Right now, the estimated costs for these projects are adding up to $13.5 billion in today's value. And with this study is a partnership with the Army Corps of Engineers. This partnership is very important because if the project gets approved by Congress, the federal government will pay up to 65% of those costs. and the city is gonna have to come up with the other 35% of those costs. We are also working with, in collaboration with other city agencies under the Climate SF umbrella, including the Office of Resilience and Capital Planning, MTA, Public Works, PUC, and the San Francisco Planning Department. This graphic here shows the areas that are susceptible to flooding by 2100. So we expect by 2050 that up to 500 structures and city assets will be vulnerable to flooding. And by 2140, those damages can add up to $23 billion. The Army Corps, they do this scenario that is called the no action scenario to establish a baseline of costs for damages, so that they can compare those costs with all the different alternatives that they're proposing and see what is the cost benefit relationship to each one of those alternatives. As many of you know, the San Francisco shoreline, a lot of that has been built over Bayfield on the using bay mud, and because of that, a lot of those areas are susceptible to reconstruction if you have a large earthquake. So this picture here shows some of the potential damages if you have an earthquake of a large scale, and you can see some of the utilities, infrastructure, the seawall, and of course both the piers and the wharves are all at risk. You can see here's on the right hand side some of those pictures from the 1906 earthquake, and the one on the bottom right is actually at the Embarcadero, and you see that rupture. So if you have an earthquake that happens during the day, at any given day, we can have up to 40,000 people at risk on property for earthquake events. This is showing like where we are in the process. We have been doing this work since 2018, doing this general investigation and feasibility study. Last year, we released 7 adaptation strategies. We've been working with the Army Corps of Engineers and also the city agencies to come up with this draft plan that was released at the end of January. And we are in this 60-day public comment period that is part of the NEPA process that we are, reaching out to the public, doing a lot of community engagement, workshops, walking tours, and trying to get feedback from the public. The idea is that once we have additional public feedback, we are also working with the Army Corps of Engineers they are doing further feasibility analysis. And we are also working with all the city agencies to get further comments. And so the idea is to come up with a final plan by the end of the next year, 2025, and seek congressional approval by 2026. If the project gets approved, we start this the process of the pre-construction engineering design, and that is expected to take place starting 2026 until 2030, and construction is expected to start by 2030. We hope that some of those first actions will be implemented by 2140, and this study is to cover between 2040 and 2140. And so what is this plan is trying to cover? It is trying to cover where we're going to build those line of defenses. Are we building them along the existing shoreline? Are we pushing bayward? Are we pulling inland? We're also looking at how high we are building those flood defenses. That is in response to some of the projections of sea level rise, but also to respond to the different conditions that we have along the shoreline across the 7.5 miles. And also we are looking at how much space is going to take for us to activate those shorelines. One of the comments that we heard from the public, and I think also from this body, was that nobody wants to have a wall, blocking the connection from the city to the bay. And so we are looking at this transitional space where we're gonna have to create this grading, transitional grading from the new elevated shoreline to the existing grade. This space is also the area that we are expected to have those seismic retrofits along the shoreline. And what is not being decided at this stage, we are not deciding about the detailed design for the flood defenses. We are also not designing the waterfront streets or open spaces and all the infrastructure. This is a very high level plan that is looking at the location of those shoreline defenses, but we also not going to have the timing and sequence of construction because we don't have those detailed designs yet. Also, the plan does not including a funding plan. So at this moment, the city we are going to have to work with the city agencies to figure out how we are going to come up with the funding to match the 35% of the 65% of federal government funding. So this plan is not a redesign for the future of the waterfront, and is not a plan from the Better District or those areas around. But one of the things that this plan is trying to do, it is trying to tie in existing city projects that are already ongoing, such as Mission Rock or the Bayfront Park along Terry Francois, and it's trying to tie in all those projects in a more cohesive defensive strategy to protect the city shoreline. One of the things that we are very proud of this work with the Army Corps of Engineers is that it is one of the first times that we have a more robust, comprehensive benefit analysis that is being included as part of this plan. The Army Corps of Engineers, typically they historically they have been taking into account only the national economic development, which is dollar signs from the damages. In this case here, they are also taking into consideration the regional economic impacts, including jobs, environmental quality, consequences, and the compliance. But also, we have taken into consideration the other social effects. That includes the disproportionate effects on vulnerable populations. This disc here that you see on the right-hand side shows some of those other social effects that have been taken into account in defining this plan. And the Army Corps of Engineers have metrics for each one of those effects in order to compare the different alternatives that have been looking at. The plan, one of the things that the project is already working on is some of those early projects, and those early projects are not part of this plan. Those are the early projects that have been funded by the Measure A proposal, the bond measure proposal that was passed back in 2018. This draft plan here is looking at first actions that will be implemented starting 2030 and beyond to defend against 1.5 to 3.5 feet of sea level rise, and those actions are going to be prioritized and phased. The plan includes a robust monitoring system, and that monitoring system will define the subsequent actions that are going to defend against 3.5 feet of sea level rise. Are you guys hearing okay? Because I'm hearing a lot of background noise, so I just want to make sure that you can hear. Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
I'll keep going then. One of the things that is important is that this plan needs to be adaptable over time. So we want to make sure that this plan can address adaptation over time to include higher levels of adaptation, passing beyond the 7 feet 7 feet of sea level rise projections. This graph here shows in a very summarized way what is the draft plan. So you see this orange line band across the waterfront that extends from Heron's Head Park all the way to Pier 27 or Telegraph Hill, more or less. It is the area that we are proposing to elevate the shoreline and doing seismic retrofit along the shoreline. There is as I mentioned, the plan extends all the way to the aquatic park. And so in the Fisherman's Wharf area, as well as in the Embarcadero, we are proposing to improve some of the piers and some of the select buildings. Along the Embarcadero area, we are proposing to elevate some of the historic buildings and the wharfs. And I have some graphics that shows in more detail how that is going to happen. And across the entire area, we are trying to incorporate as much as possible some of those nature-based solutions. Another thing that we are going to, that the plan is proposing, is to propose a waterfront-wide stormwater management adaptation, because elevating the shoreline is going to increase the bathtub effect of trapping stormwater that it's trying to reach the bay. So stormwater management is going to be pumping is going to be needed, and it's going to have to be increased. Both pumping, storage systems, and also stormwater management, through greenway infrastructure. That is something that the plan is considering. So we will take a closer look on each one of those reaches. The plan is divided in 4 reaches. The first reach here, the Fisherman's Wharf. In general, this area has a higher ground. You see this dashed line. And so the plan is proposing a lighter touch here in terms of what it's proposing. So it is looking at flood-proofing some of those buildings along the water's edge, and add some of those short walls around the piers. The idea here is that those short walls will extend the lifespan of those piers until the port and the tenants and the city, we can figure out how we're going to adapt those piers in the future. Some of the subsequent actions that have been identified here include to elevate the shoreline, the wharves, and the historic buildings with some of the seismic improvements, and of course defend the utility and the transportation networks. This graphic here shows what do we mean by flood-proofing some of those select buildings. So flood-proofing can happen in several different ways. It could happen by sealing some of those openings at the lower levels, windows and doors. It could include also, elevating some of the transformers or some of the more critical infrastructure of the building. But one of the things that the plan is proposed is to add those short walls around the piers, and that is to protect against, wave action and gain some time, extend the lifespan of those piers. For the Embarcadero area, this is an area that the plan identified as with a lot of critical city infrastructure, and this is it is an area that has some of the lower elevations along the line, and therefore it is more at risk. So the plan is proposing here to elevate to defend against 3.5 feet of sea level rise, all in one step, in the first actions, and that is to minimize disruption due to construction. In this area, we also identified some of the buildings along the wharves, some of the bulkhead of the buildings, and some of the historical infrastructure, including the ferry building. And I have a graphic that shows in more detail how that could work. In this area, we also adding the short walls around the piers. So the piers themselves, they will stay at their existing height. They will just receive those short walls to extend their lifespan. So in this area, the plan hasn't identified any subsequent action since the first action here is already elevating to defend against 3.5 feet of sea level rise. This graphic here shows how we would elevate some of those wharves and bulkheads of the buildings. So that is showing here in this red color, the areas that are being elevated. The piers themselves, they will stay at the existing height, and they will receive those short walls around them. So we're going to have to create some positional space between the bulkheads of the buildings and the piers themselves. Looking back towards the city, we will create that transitional space. You know, there could be terrace or have a gradual transition of this grading that to meet the existing city grade, and that is the area that will receive the seismic retrofit. In South Beach and Mission Bay Ridge, this is the third ridge. This is an area that the plan identified that we have, in general, we have a little bit of more space. So the plan is proposing to have a more incremental approach, and that is to elevate the shoreline to defend against 1.5 feet of sea level rise, and that can be adaptable in the future. So you see here in this the orange color, the areas that have been proposed for to elevate the shoreline with some of those ground improvements. The plan, we identified some areas where we could apply some of the nature-based solutions. So you see in green areas marked here, you know, towards the south and also along the shorelines of the creek. For the bridges in this area, the Mission Creek, the bridges will remain at existing height for doing these first actions, and they will receive those closure deployable structures that will be deployed when we have storm events. And I have a graphic that will explain a little bit more how that could work. You see also seeing in this gray area some of the areas that are not part of this project, such as the Mission Rock and the Bayfront Park along Mission Bay, and that is so. But the plan here is to tie back in this proposal with the existing mitigation measures that those projects are already including. The piers along these areas is also will receive some of those short walls and also to extend the lifespan of the piers. This graph here shows how those closure of the bridges could happen. You know, once you elevate the shoreline of the creeks, if the bridges stay at the existing heights, they offer a risk because the water can seep through the bridges. So the idea here is to have this deployable structure that will be deployed when we have stormwater events and high tides. And it is anticipated that those bridges will have to be closed very frequent, less than once a year for the first decades of the project. Over time, the frequency and the intensity is going to increase, and eventually those bridges are going to have to be elevated. Oh, sorry, and I forgot to mention one thing here in Mission Bay. So some of the subsequent actions are that we identified are to elevate the shoreline to withstand 3.5 feet of sea level rise, and potentially add more nature-based solutions. Here, so this is the last reach that we have with the Isles Creek Bayview. This is also an area that we have identified that has a little bit of more space. So we're also proposing an incremental approach to elevate the shoreline to defend against 1.5 feet of sea level rise. So you see the areas in orange that we are proposing to elevate that shoreline. The piers around the Pier 80 and Pier 96, we also received those short walls and seismic retrofits. Along the creek, we are proposing some of those nature-based solutions, particularly west of the 3rd Street Bridge, and also closer to the mouth of the creek, and along Warm Water Cove Farm. And the southern edge of the creek here in red, we are proposing to raise those wharfs to continue those operations that the port has over there. The 3rd Street Bridge here is not part of this plan because the Public Works is already working on elevating that bridge. But the Illinois Street Bridge will receive those deployable temporary closure structures. similar to what the ones that are being proposed at Junk Creek. And let's see. This is showing some of those nature-based solutions can be applied, and the idea is that those elevated shorelines with natural berms can be part of the open space systems, so they can include trails, bike paths, promenades, and in order to also provide more community benefits to the neighborhoods. So just to finalize, the way that we are looking at it is it is a once in a century opportunity to defend the communities and the assets, including some of those vital city infrastructure, and while we can address some of those seismic risks, improve that earthquake safety, we can also see this as an opportunity to secure funding with collaboration with the federal government and invest in a great public waterfront where we can add some of those nature-based solutions and adapt some of the historic resources to climate change. As I mentioned, this is the last slide. As I mentioned, we are in the public period comments, so we have done a lot of public outreach. We just had last week, the week before last, we had 4 public workshops. We also offer walking tours. We're trying to make it as easy as possible for the public to make comments. We have updated our website. We added a lot of information on our website, including story maps. We also there is of a longer deck than this that people can watch at their own time. And we have been reaching out to all the different CBOs and also going to bodies of decision makers in the city, such as this one. Also, we have gone to the Historic Preservation Commission. We are going to the Planning Commission this week. We are going to MTA board and the board of supervisors, and I believe also PUC board. We are going there as well. So we are trying to cover as much as possible in this very short time and try to get feedback from the community. So with that, I'm open for questions, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Luis. That's a lot to present, but we appreciate your hanging around for it. And so it's just to get this straight, you're officially taking comments on the Army Corps' flood study plan through the end of this month. And tonight's presentation was kind of a primer to let you know what's going on with the study. This is a very design-based pair of groups, and this is not a design plan, but it's getting you ready for when these projects come through is a lot of what it's about. But now we can take some comments and see if Luis can address those. We even have an expert back here, Kevin Conger, who's been involved in a lot of vulnerability studies, and Bob Battaglia is.
Can I?
Yes, please.
Is this working? Oh, finally, some engineering to talk about. I've been quiet tonight. Yeah, this is really interesting and fascinating, and I agree it is an opportunity. One thought that occurs to me, which is I have to admit is from a person that's not in the room. So this may seem off the wall, but it would seem to me that there should be opportunity to realign the shoreline a bit and maybe have some natural areas that serve as buffers and transitions and not just wall off the waterfront, which I know you have some edging, some green edging, but I think especially in the southern part of the waterfront, I'm not sure, port operations guy, but down around Heron's Head, I thought there might be some spaces there that could be converted into wetlands or beaches or.
And so the more natural shoreline is what I'm hearing there, more natural solutions. And interestingly, I know they've gotten a number of comments along that line, and they're looking at some options, even in the central waterfront, for how that could be introduced more.
Yeah,
so
and
you're consistent with some of what I've heard so far.
Thank you, Dan. And I think Aquatic Park also, there's a beach there and there's some other places where you might have some opportunities. The problem with natural infrastructure that a lot of folks that haven't actually been involved in design of that may not realize is that it takes space. And this design is really kind of an edging. And so I think fundamentally my point is it would be nice if you could go inland a little bit and not be stuck with the existing shoreline, which is somewhat arbitrary given, relative to modern conditions and future conditions and uses, et cetera. Secondly, I think the project should be reviewed by the Engineering Criteria Review Board at BCDC, which I happen to be on, but there are other people that I think would have more valuable input, geotechnical, seismic, and geostructural, structural. So those are my comments. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if you wanted to respond to some.
Sure.
You
don't have to.
You can answer me. Luis, let's get through a couple more questions here first.
Okay, no problem.
I would strongly encourage this group to weigh in on the design side. The Corps of Engineers is known to be pretty much by the books, at least that's what their primary purpose is. There are exceptions to the rule. I like to quote the San Antonio River Corridor. My first project, actually, I was involved in where we challenged the Corps of Engineers in a very significant way. And we came up not with only the improvements of the river walk, which is a public works project, but how to extend the entire cross-section of a river walk from Flour Mill all the way to the very north. That is a type of challenge I believe we have here. And I believe, picking up on what you said, we should actively look at every aspect of the port property and this tremendous amount of work that over the decades has gone into creating a fabulously appointed shoreline and make sure that we can save it by doing other things to it. That may either mean moving the line further in or finding different cross sections by which we meet different conditions in different very public ways. I think it's a great urban design project, and I would encourage every landscape architect, and engineer to roll up their sleeves and help the Corps, not to oppose them, but help them to do a better job than what they normally do. And I strongly encourage participation in that.
Could I follow up on that real quickly? Sorry, I'll be brief. We're in a good spot here in the San Francisco Bay Area, both with the San Francisco District Army Corps of Engineers, which has been pretty flexible and innovative. But yeah, it's not going to happen unless people push, because there's millions of reasons, maybe $1 billion or $2 why it won't happen. So yeah, people really have to push and have vision beyond the existing lines, I think. So I really appreciate what you said.
Others want to comment on the presentation or where it's going? Alma.
I mean, for what it's worth, I have to say that this is a very succinct and clear presentation for something that is very difficult to explain. So I would like to recognize that this is pretty right on. I'm encouraged by the fact that they have this whole circle of other benefits to be considered in the equation. I would be looking forward to understanding how they apply to these different interventions and the different color-coded solutions, because that's actually what, I mean, I think, Luis, you mentioned it in the presentation, that Army Corps tends to just look at hard numbers and, dollars. And in this case, having to add that other components, I think is going to be the super big challenge, but I'm encouraged by seeing that as part of the foundation of this work, so great.
Team is listening and taking notes, I assure you.
Could I say something?
Oh.
Would you also talk, please, about the fact that the challenge is not just the San Francisco Bay Edge. There is a requirement for integration with other measures all around the Bay that sets other constraints. I do not know exactly what they are, but we should be aware of them if we choose or ultimately decide to be actively involved in it. Rose, could you briefly explain that?
Luis?
Yeah, so yes, it is correct. And one of the comments that we received, when we, like last year when we went to the community is, people were concerned about what's happening, southern of the Heron's Head Park. That was one of the comments that we received. In our project is limited by the geography of the port. On the southern edge, we have those development agreements, both the Bayview, Hunters Point, and Candlestick Point, that they are have their own set of mitigation measures, trying to address the sea level rise. One of the things that we identified, there is an area of the Yosemite Slough that they didn't have any planning for that part of the city, and so we worked with the planning departments. They got a grant and they are starting that work right now. But that is only talking about San Francisco, right? So there is a need to have more coordination, across the Bay with the other efforts, and we have been, in conversations with BCDC. I'm a part of one of the BCDC subgroups on equity. Adam Varat, who is the deputy director, he's also part of the BCDC coordination effort. So we are looking at how this plan can not only like inform what's going to happen here, but also maybe provide ideas for what other jurisdictions can do, and also talk to people about ways to work with the Army Corps of Engineers, because a lot of this is very new to the Army Corps of Engineers as well. So we are kind of like, creating that path of collaboration. And another thing that I didn't mention in this presentation, that anything that is above and beyond what the Army Corps of Engineers approve or the Congress approved, that is on the Army Corps of Engineers plan, the city can still do it. It's just that the city is going to have to come up with the funding for that. So what we're trying to do is to leverage, the maximum amount of dollars, so we can try to bring the most amount of community benefits for the city.
Thank you, Luis. Kristen?
Yeah, I just had a question for Luis on, I know at least, I think 3, if not 4 of the locations on our San Francisco waterfront were studied by Resilient by Design. And I was wondering if that work made it into the study and how it informed the results.
Yeah, so that was looked at, the area of the Les Creek, because we had a team working there. That was looked at. I think, back then when you start to look at these different alternatives, I think informed some of those strategies that we had, that included a whole lot more of retreat areas. One of the things that we heard from the community and through this process of looking at the equity as one of the components is that, that retreating in that area, it seems to be not recommended because all the equity impacts, both on the community, but also the loss of jobs, and loss of affordable light industrial space. So a lot of those things were looked at, but they end up being vetted in the process of coming to this plan. There is some areas that are identified as possible retreat moving forward, and this is also something that we are working with the agencies and see if we can still push for those ideas forward. But it is complicated because, yes, again, it takes a lot of space and has impacts on economic impacts and on the some of the the social infrastructure.
Thank you for that explanation. I also just wanted to say, I don't know how everybody else feels, but looking at this plan, it's very sad to me that we would be having all of these walls and levees along the waterfront that we've been working so hard. A lot of you have been on this board a lot longer than I have, but we've been working so hard to create this access to. And I lived in New Orleans for a number of years, and it's a city that's very confusing about where the water is because you can't see it anywhere because there's always a levee. So I know that this is a very complex topic, and there's a lot of brilliant minds working on it who have taken a lot into consideration. But I just want to say that I think that if we ended up with a plan where we're raising pretty much all of San Francisco's waterfront so that we can't really see it or easily get to it, I really think that's a poor outcome. And on the BCDC side of the table over here, I would just encourage the commission to be exploring more ideas about changing the shape of the shoreline and some of the ideas that Bob was talking about, and relooking at our policies so that we can, this is not, the policy of no more fills was a response to a moment in time, and we're now at a new moment in time, and we need a new policy response. And so I don't know what the proper channels or whatever to say this, but I think it's an important conversation to be having at the commission.
I can assure you, being part of the board's internal review on this, maintaining a relationship of the city to the bay, being able to see that, being able to observe it, making that a part of the waterfront experience is a high priority of the team. Putting this together and showing all the options to how that can continue to occur, to avoid that wall along the edge. Gary.
So the study goes to 3.5 feet of sea level rise, is that correct?
It's looking at 3.5 and 7.
And 7.
Yeah, so the first actions are to defend it against 1.5 to 3.5, and then the subsequent actions are from between 3.5 and 7.
And a lot of the moves are to construct a 3.5 with adaptability to 7.
Is there a year that is estimated to correspond to the 7 that you're working towards?
So that'll be at the end of the century. Yeah, like beyond 2100.
Luis, do you want to acknowledge the monitoring now that you mentioned?
I'm sorry?
The kind of monitoring that happens in between. And sorry, Laura Site Lab is also working on the WRP program. But
yes.
Louise, I was just wondering if you want to mention the kind of monitoring that comes in between the kind of near actions.
Yes, the monitoring, starts, from the beginning of from those first actions, between that is the defending between 1.5 and 3.5, and depending on that monitoring, that is going to define those subsequent actions. That is, could be potentially from defending from 3.5 all the way up to 7. There's a lot of uncertainty in terms of the curves that the plan is trying to be, as flexible and adaptable as possible over time. It is, trying to cover between 2040 and 2140. But again, I think because there is so much uncertainty, we are trying to move away from giving specific dates of saying, by this time we're going to have this amount of sea level rise, because we don't know.
So, the reason I asked is because by the time any significant portion of this is implemented, 2100 won't look like it's that far away. And so when you talk about levees and you talk about pumping, it doesn't end in 2100 like 2100, the problem solved. It just means nobody in this room is alive. But it's committing the city to endless pumping and levee raising, and I thought the ferry building was a difficult problem. I don't know where all this leads and where all that money comes from. It sounds like maybe the funding is tied to engineering solutions. I mean, can you use federal money for managed retreat, or it's only when that money is being used by the Army Corps, and therefore you only get Army Corps solutions?
So the funding is tied to solutions, and they're all engineering solutions. Some of them are softer, some of them are harder. And if there's determined to be a federal interest, in other words, that there's more to be saved than spent, the feds will finance 65%. And then locally, we're required to come up with 35%. So it's going to be a pick and choose as to which ones go forward. And where that 35 comes from is not identified, I think. There are people that have ideas, but that's why this is going to be a long-running project, and you're going to hear more.
Yes, but to add to that, then the Army Corps is much more open to nature-based solutions today from where they were maybe 2 years ago. I think, and this plan we are trying to add as much as possible of those nature-based solutions. And, I think retreating it's a little bit more complicated, that we are gonna have to have those conversations. But yeah, it is something that we are trying to achieve.
Any other questions in the room here? Stefan?
I have a question. I'll try to phrase this as a question. Louise, thank you very much for that presentation. It's great to see you. I have a question about the board's role in commenting on or influencing or reviewing this plan moving forward. And then I guess the related question to that is maybe some more information about how the port is working with the city, particularly where these issues of adjacency and land are constrained, and sort of what that process looks like. And I think I would assume that is also a place where there aren't a lot of good precedents for that. And so this sort of relationship building that leads to implementation is sort of groundbreaking. Louise, could you comment on either one of those?
Yeah, no, I think that the way that we see it, we see the BCDC as partner on this effort. And so we have presented to a group at BCDC. We also got comments from them, from you, but like from different people at BCDC, and we are, one of the things that we are working on is to get coordination between the city agencies, so we can have like a city letter that is going to inform what is the city's position on this plan, because it's not only the port, it has all the all the different agencies. I think moving forward, I believe we're gonna keep coming back to you to provide an update whenever we have those milestones, and get comments, and see if we can address those comments as we move along. That's my personal opinion, but I don't know exactly if we need to establish like a mechanism of meeting frequently or have like a small subgroup that is part of that. I don't know.
Yeah, the port works with the different agencies, MTA, Public Works, PUC, City Planning. Right now are consulted and advised throughout this process and are coordinating comments on the flood study responses as well. So that one.
Thank you.
Any more?
The only thing I was going to add is that we are lucky to have a great team of consultants, and some of the consultants are part of this body. So it's but
from BCDC's perspective, I think you're mostly coordinating with our planning division and not the regulatory. But when we start seeing actual projects that are impacting permits in the constructed
that is correct.
That is when we would start bringing it to the board.
Or a project-related group.
I think the fear in my mind is, you know what I'm going to say, is that the levy is a project that is at a reviewable stage where decisions about the constraints around that levy have already been determined. And so like a nature-based solution or a different kind of approach becomes outside the purview of our role in trying to guarantee public access.
I just also, I think some combination of the three of us have been participating in the regulatory advisor working group with the Port of San Francisco and the Army Corps. We are currently also reviewing the NEPA document. I'm blanking right now again on what the document is, but we're reviewing it, preparing comments together.
Yeah, the environmental
And-
impact study. EIS.
Yes. On the EIS. So we're involved, and then I think we've also will be having a briefing at an upcoming commission meeting for the commissioners. And we can also kind of continue trying to figure out how to bring, I'm not going to do it for Ashley, but we can too.
Thank you.
We have one remaining item this evening, and that is to close in memory of Marcia Matum. We need someone to make a motion in her honor to do so.
I'll make a motion to close in her honor. So moved.
All in favor of closing in honor of the late Marcia Matum?
Aye.
I see unanimous show of hands. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
We have to close.
You are in the evening.
Or is that a adequate closure for our special purposes?
Do we need to go through our own
Can I
ritual?
get a first and a second?
I'll make a motion to close the.
I second.
Thank you, guys.
I thought it was a joint close. That's okay.
No, I thought you had the authority to close it.
Thank you very much, Dan.
Thank you, Lucy.
Yeah, thanks,
Thanks,
Louise.